Rey is not a Mary Sue, and I'm going to prove this in 6 main parts. The first being an introduction to what a Mary Sue is, the second being an analysis of The Force Awakens, the third being an analysis of The Last Jedi, the fourth being an analysis of The Rise of Skywalker, the fifth being an analysis of external material, and the sixth being a conclusion. Now, before people freak out at there being a section about external material, please let me explain. I know external material should not need to be consumed to better understand a movie. That's why it's its own section. This section is not meant as a defense for the movies, but a defense for the canon. To some people, the canon matters more than the actual films, so this section is really for you guys. So when I actually do cover the 3 films, I'm not going to reference any other external material, other than the films and the shows. I do feel the shows are fair game, but if you disagree, then oh well. Also, since the trilogy is complete, I will be making references all across the trilogy when discussing each film. So when I'm talking about The Force Awakens, for example, I may reference The Last Jedi or The Rise of Skywalker. One last thing before I begin, if this video makes it on any sort of podcast where people are watching my video and analyzing my points, I would really appreciate it if you at least let me know on Twitter that a video exists of people watching my video. My Twitter handle is thegoldman25. I don't really care if anyone streams this video, I'd just like to know so I can watch people reacting to my video. So anyway, that's enough with the intro. Let's begin with what is a Mary Sue. So what is a Mary Sue? And according to wikipedia.com, and yes, Wikipedia is usually reliable, so don't let your teachers tell you otherwise. A Mary Sue is a generic name for any fictional character who is so competent or perfect that it appears absurd, even in the context of the fictional setting. Now, it's important to note that just because a character is overpowered, that doesn't necessarily mean they're a Mary Sue automatically. Superman is a character that is definitely overpowered, but the reason Superman is not a Gary Stu, the male version of a Mary Sue, is because in his universe his powers are explained and they make sense. Superman is not human, he is Kryptonian, an alien race from the planet Krypton. The reason why Superman is so strong is because since he grew up on Earth, he's exposed to our sun rather than the sun near Krypton. When exposed to a young yellow star like Earth's sun, which is much smaller than their own sun and with a vastly higher energy output, their bodies are able to absorb and process so much energy that it eventually manifests as vast superhuman powers, like super strength or flight, for example. Obviously, none of this makes sense in real-life science, but it doesn't have to. Superman lives in a fictional universe with its own fictional rules, and given those sets of rules, his powers make sense. So that's why Superman is not a Gary Stu. Now back to the definition. Mary Sues may excel at tasks that should not be possible for them, or they may upstage the protagonist of a fictional setting, such as saving them. They may disregard previously established aspects of the fiction, such as characterization and natural laws. So going back to the Superman example, if he all of a sudden could shapeshift into other characters, that would be a trait of a Mary Sue character because he would now have another very beneficial ability that doesn't match up with the rules established in the universe. But I do feel there needs to be something said about rules of a universe, because I do think there is a stark difference between whether or not something breaks the rules of a universe or it expands upon the rules of a universe. In the case of Star Wars, the source of power comes from the Force. However, in each movie of the Skywalker saga, a new Force power is introduced. In The Empire Strikes Back, you could levitate objects with the Force. In Return of the Jedi, you can now shoot lightning from your hands. In The Phantom Menace, you can run at super speed, and boy would that have been convenient at the end. In Attack of the Clones, you can absorb lightning in your hands. In Revenge of the Sith, you can literally save yourself from dying by using the dark side. In The Force Awakens, you can just stop blaster bullets with the Force. In The Last Jedi, you can force project yourself across the galaxy. And in The Rise of Skywalker, you can use the Force to heal people. So what I'm trying to say is that if a new power is introduced, there's an unclear line between whether or not it's an expansion of the mythos or if it's a contradiction of the lore. So if a new power is introduced, the question may arise as to whether or not it contradicts the lore or expands the mythos, which is very important. But the bigger question that may arise is, why was this power never used before? Now, I'm going to continue on with this point when I talk about Rey's force healing, so I'm not done with this yet, but I just wanted to make the point that there's a difference between expansion and contradiction. Back to what a Mary Sue is. The term Mary Sue originated all the way back in 1973. A woman named Paula Smith wrote a Star Trek fanfiction named A Trekkie's Tale, and in it created a character named Lieutenant Mary Sue. She was the youngest lieutenant in the fleet, and she was only 15 years old. Mary Sue was pretty much the perfect person. Everyone loved her, she was very smart, very talented, so talented that she won a Nobel Peace Prize for her ability to fly the Enterprise. Even though she eventually died from an illness, everyone loved her so much that they decided to make a single day per year devoted to her. So now that we know what a Mary Sue is and where it originated from, why are Mary Sue characters bad and why should they be avoided? For one, characters are at their best when they are flawed. No human beings are perfect, and if you want to make your characters as relatable as possible, then you should want to make them as flawed as possible as well. Since Mary Sue characters are essentially perfect human beings, they don't have any flaws that the audience can relate with. Also, dynamic characters are the ones that spark change, whether it be within themselves or within other people. There is usually an essential flaw that a character possesses. The struggle to overcome that flaw is what makes a good story. So again, since Mary Sues don't have any flaws, there's nothing for them to overcome, thus there is no story. And lastly, in stories like Star Wars where there are many fights, you want your fights to have stakes, where your main character can lose or lose something. Since Mary Sues are extremely overpowered, there are no stakes because it's pretty much impossible for them to lose. Let's look at Iron Man 1 and Captain Marvel. By the way, I don't think Captain Marvel is a Mary Sue, but I don't think she's a good character either. In a one-on-one fight, Captain Marvel would easily beat Iron Man, but Iron Man is a much more beloved character because he is far more relatable, and he struggles to achieve his goals. Captain Marvel doesn't struggle at all in her film, really, and the climactic battle has no tension because she is way more overpowered than everyone else. So that is why you want flawed and relatable characters, not Mary Sues. Now, there's one last thing I want to talk about in this opening section, and it's kind of a tough topic to address. Many people claim that the Mary Sue label is sexist. I don't believe that if someone calls a character a Mary Sue that it automatically makes them sexist, but I do believe there is a double standard. Now, I could be wrong in saying this, but this is just my own observation from my own personal experiences. I see female characters called Mary Sues all the time, such as Rey, Captain Marvel, Arya Stark, and Korra, just to name a few. But almost never do I hear a male character called a Gary Stu. If you're someone who believes that any of those characters I listed above are Mary Sues or some other characters, can you also name any men who are Gary Stews? I feel like I could make the argument that many of the superheroes we see are Gary Stews, but I don't want to because I don't believe that they are. The only man who I've ever heard been called a Mary Sue was Starkiller, but besides that I've never heard it used before. So again, this is just my own observation, but I do feel there's a double standard between a Mary Sue and a Gary Stu. But anyway, that is my introduction to the term Mary Sue, and now it is time to discuss the films. Up first, we have The Force Awakens. Now, basically what I will be doing is going through each scene that I feel helps flesh out Rey's character and disprove the Mary Sue argument. Obviously, there are some scenes that I will spend a lot of time on, and there will be others that I don't spend that much time on. Now, in preparation for this video, I did watch many videos on why Rey is a Mary Sue, so I will try to address these points as much as I can. But without further ado, let's begin. The first scene with Rey is her daily life on Jakku. Now, for the sake of clarification, I'm going to classify Rey's introduction as everything up until the point where she meets Finn. So this includes her first trip to Nima Outpost, rescuing BB-8, her second trip to Nima Outpost, and her fighting those thugs. Sound good? Good. So let's look at this scene. Now, if I were to do a moment-by-moment breakdown, there's nothing in this opening scene that depicts Rey as a Mary Sue, but this scene is essential in providing reasons why Rey is so good at the things that many people see her as being a Mary Sue. So I'm going to spend a fair amount of time on this to highlight what is shown to us in this scene. And to do that, I'm going to compare Rey's opening to Luke's opening from A New Hope. Because for one, both openings are very similar, and two, many people love to make the argument that Luke isn't a Mary Sue, but Rey is, and use this opening scene as an example as to why. So let's compare what we learn about these two in this scene. First, we learn that Luke is a farmer and Rey is a scavenger, both with a similar skill set. Both are engineers of some kind, especially when it comes to droids, and both know how to drive a speeder. Where they differ slightly is in their use of weaponry. Luke can use a rifle and Rey can use a staff. Now, their skill set was never the problem, but how these characters obtain this skill set is what seems to be up for debate. Both films never straight up tell us how these characters learn these skills, but based off of clues given to us in the film, we can logically infer how these characters obtained these skill sets. In films, the storytellers do not have the same luxuries that books do. They need to show us things for the audience to infer, while the books can straight up tell the audience. In the case of Luke, we see that Luke works on his uncle's farm. Since a lot of these skills that he has here are skills that are useful when it comes to farming, it is a safe assumption to make that his aunt or uncle taught him how to use these things. Now, many people would point to Rey and say there is nothing that can help us logically infer how Rey learned these skills, but I completely disagree. We are shown that Rey essentially works for Unkar Plutt on a commission type basis. She goes to him twice in the opening scene to trade mechanical parts for food rations, and even makes a point about a part being a different price a week ago. And later on in the movie, when she has her Force vision, she is left with Unkar Plutt when she was like 9 years old. When Han asks her who had possession of the Falcon all this time, she's able to tell him a long list of people who stole the Falcon.
Who had it? Duquesne?
I stole it from Unkar Plutt. He stole it from the Irving boys who stole it from Duquesne.
Who stole it from me?
And when Rey and Finn first enter the Falcon, she knows that the ship had not flown in years.
No! This ship hasn't flown in years!
There's also a deleted scene that highlights the relationship further, but deleted scenes do not count, and they count as external material, so I am not going to count it here. The point I am trying to make is that it can be logically inferred that Rey learned her skill set from Unkar Plutt. Unkar Plutt wants his scavengers to bring him parts, so it would make logical sense that he trains them to be able to scavenge certain things and to have a strong engineering background. If Unkar Plutt doesn't have capable scavengers, then he doesn't have a business to run. If Unkar Plutt didn't have any interest in training scavengers, then why would he take on Rey when she was so young? I don't think he did it out of the kindness of his heart. Also, another thing about Rey's skillset, given the circumstances she lived in, she definitely had to adapt. I can easily imagine when she was like a 13-year-old girl that she would get beaten up a lot because she wasn't strong enough to defend herself. Jakku is the type of world where you have to adapt to survive. So if you're someone who lives on Jakku, then it is more than likely that you have some sort of combat experience. Now, besides establishing skill sets and how those skill sets make sense, the opening scene sets up her essential flaw, and that is her insecurities about her parents. People who claim Rey is a Mary Sue love to say that she has no flaws and that she's perfect, but this opening scene does so much to establish her flaws. I think the reason that people might look over this is because this scene shows us her flaws rather than telling us. Now, you could argue that this scene doesn't do a great job at that. Now, I would disagree with this for the reasons I'm about to mention. Rey's flaw in The Force Awakens is her inability to accept that her parents left her and aren't coming back. One of the biggest weaknesses that Rey possesses is that she's always looking for external validation. She only thinks she is worthy or important if other people see her as worthy or important, We see this throughout The Last Jedi as she keeps on trying to get the validation from Luke. We see this in The Rise of Skywalker when she tells Leia she isn't worthy of wielding Luke's lightsaber. And in The Force Awakens, Rey is searching for the approval of her parents. Her parents left her on a miserable planet with the most miserable people. If her parents return, then that means that she is important to them in some way. Again, tying into Rey's need to feel important by other people. In the opening scene, we get many examples of this, most notably the scratches on her wall in her AT-AT. When she says later on, "I know all about waiting, for my family, they'll be back one day."
I know all about waiting. For my family, they'll be back one day.
We can logically infer that these are the days since her parents left. This is also something Kylo confirms in The Rise of Skywalker, but we'll get there much later. Now, a lot of what's shown in this scene actually seems to contradict that. She looks at this old woman in fear that she might end up like her. She carries a toy of an X-Wing pilot and wears an X-Wing helmet. When she looks at the ship flying away, we can infer that she does want to leave the planet and have some sort of exciting life. So given these details, why does she stay on Jakku? Well, highlighting these details, it emphasizes how badly Rey needs her parents, and this is her big flaw. And later on when Maz has a talk with Rey, she gets exposed even more. Deep down, she already knows that her parents aren't coming back, but she needs them so badly that she's willing to waste her life away just for the slightest possibility of her parents coming back. She is literally in denial when she tells BB-8 that her parents will come back one day. If anything, this dependence on her parents and her insecurities about why she was left on Jakku are a much bigger flaw than anything Luke or Anakin possessed. So for those of you who say that Rey has no flaws, I would strongly ask you to reconsider. Anyway, one thing that is introduced that people criticize Rey for is her ability to speak to droids. Now, instead of just assuming this is a characteristic of a Mary Sue, ask yourself, does this make sense given what we are shown? Well, she is an engineer, and she is good with parts, especially with droids. Wouldn't it make sense that she would have learned to understand droids at some point? I feel like communicating with droids would be something pretty important to know how to do if you're going to be an engineer in the Star Wars universe. So her understanding droids makes perfect sense to me. Now, I will say that her being able to understand Wookiees is a little ridiculous. For one, why would Wookiees be on Jakku for an extended period of time? They would die of heat exhaustion like immediately. And even if they were there for a little bit, it would be pretty hard to learn an entire language just like that, especially like the ones Wookiees speak. But isn't this just as ridiculous as Han knowing how to speak Wookiee in Solo? So if it's ridiculous for Rey, then it's just as ridiculous for Han. But anyway, there you go. Here is your best argument for why Rey would be a Mary Sue. Now let's move on to Rey fighting some thugs. As I said earlier, given the situation that she lives in, I think it makes perfect sense that Rey would learn how to defend herself. However, some people would disagree with me, and that's okay. However, my biggest problem that I have with people who question Rey's ability to do certain things is the ridiculous double standard that she is held to. Rey is the only character that I see in fiction whose every trait is questioned. Literally no one else does this with any character in Star Wars that was created before Disney bought the franchise. Princess Leia knows how to shoot a blaster better than stormtroopers. How does this make sense? Well, she's in the original trilogy, so no one is going to criticize her. Padme Amidala knows how to use blasters better than battle droids. How does she know how to do this? Well, she was created by George Lucas and not Disney, so it's okay. Rey knows how to fight with the staff. How does she know how to do this? Well, she must be a Mary Sue. Luke knows how to be an expert pilot. How can he do this? Well, he says numerous times that he's a pilot, so it's okay. So if Rey says many times in the film that she knows how to fight, would this solve everything? Have you ever heard the phrase show don't tell? We are told many times in A New Hope that Luke is a great pilot, but we are never shown this until the ending battle. Rey shows us she's a fighter on a few occasions, but when she can hold up her own against Kylo Ren, she's a Mary Sue? Now, don't worry, I have much more to say about the fight when we get there later. The point I'm trying to make is that not every skill set that a character has needs to be thoroughly explained. Sometimes, in order to make a more compelling and exciting film, characters will know how to do things that may not make sense given their backstory. Leia is a princess, but George Lucas wanted to make Leia not a usual damsel in distress, so he made her have some kind of skill with a blaster. Lucas wanted Padme to have an active role in taking back Naboo, so he made her good with the blaster as well. Neither of these skills are explained, but they don't have to be. If you want to read something where every skill a character has is explained, then go to Wikipedia. Movies are there to tell a story, not to provide a bibliography of every character. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that a character can know how to do anything and it will make sense. But if there is reasonable doubt that the circumstance that a character is in lends them to probably having a certain skill, then it probably doesn't need to be explained. Leia is part of a galactic rebellion, so it would make sense that she can use a blaster. She doesn't need to say randomly that she had training when she was younger. Rey lives on a planet filled with thugs, so it would make sense that she knows how to defend herself. So that is my point on people having a certain skill set that is not explained. Not all, but certain skill sets do not need to be explained. So after Rey beats up the thugs, she sees Finn and goes after him because he supposedly stole Poe's jacket. Now there are a few things I want to mention during their first encounter with each other. The first is something really stupid, but I'm going to address it. I've actually seen people make the argument that Rey being able to knock Finn down is another example of her being a Mary Sue, because Finn is a trained soldier and she isn't. Like, bro, he is currently unarmed and a girl who we just saw beat up a bunch of thugs a second ago is running after him. Not to mention she's also in possession of the droid he is looking for. It's not really in Finn's character to just beat her up and take BB-8 for himself. Also, when she hit him, it was completely by surprise. If Mike Tyson was casually walking down the street, I could walk up behind him and knock him in the head with a baseball bat and knock him down no problem. He would proceed to get up and beat the living daylight out of me, but that's not the point. So yeah, the fact that people see this as an example of a Mary Sue is baffling. Another thing I want to mention is this scene also shows that Rey is too trusting. She believes that Finn is a resistance fighter without really even questioning him. Finn could have easily been a First Order spy that would inevitably find out the location of the Resistance base. You could argue that the First Order wouldn't be sending TIE fighters to kill their own spy, but it's not the first time a squadron of TIE fighters was sent out to give the impression that they were trying to destroy the Falcon. Now this is a small point, but the larger point I wanted to make is the line, "Luke Skywalker, I thought he was a myth."
Luke Skywalker? I thought he was a myth.
This line holds credence to the notion that Rey knows about the Jedi and the powers they possess. This is further proved when Han talks to them about the Jedi later on in the Falcon. This will also tie into her using the Jedi mind trick, but we'll talk about that more when we get there. So after Rey and Finn meet, the First Order finds them and they are forced to leave Jakku. And now we get to Rey flying the Falcon. By the way, I already made a video on Rey flying the Falcon, so I'm basically going to be repeating the same points I made in that video. First, let's discuss her backstory again, because this argument that her backstory doesn't fit her skill set is, again, completely unfair. In her introduction, we learn a few things. For one, she's a scavenger. She digs through the starter store looking for parts. Now it appears that she is looking for specific parts, considering she remembers how many portions she got for a specific part like a week ago.
1/2 portion.
Last week they were a half portion each.
And later on she does do a decent job fixing the Falcon. So as we said earlier, we can logically infer that she has a strong engineering background. But as I said earlier, for whatever reason, Rey is the only character where every skill she has needs to be put into question. Remember how people were okay with Luke flying because many people said he was a good pilot? Well, Rey herself says she's a pilot numerous times, but she's a Mary Sue? Okay. And I've heard the argument that just because Rey knows how to dismantle parts, that doesn't automatically mean she's an engineer. True, but when it comes to a story, these are things that you can logically infer, because again, the movie shouldn't have to state every skill a character has. If there's a 15-year-old boy in a movie that has Call of Duty posters all over his room, and then there's a scene where he gets 30 straight kills playing Call of Duty, one can logically infer that he's been playing Call of Duty for a very long time, and he's very good at it. If this was Rey, however, people would say she's a Mary Sue because having Call of Duty posters doesn't necessarily mean she is good at Call of Duty. Maybe she just likes to collect posters. See how ridiculous this is? Now, just because someone is an engineer doesn't automatically make them a pilot. That's fair. But I want to address something about the world building of Star Wars. This is just how I always view the series, but flying doesn't seem like it's something that is that hard to learn. I always thought flying was just like driving in our world. Almost everyone drives in our world, so I always just assumed that everyone flies in Star Wars. I mean, look at Coruscant. If this was real life, I can guarantee there would be thousands of accidents a day. So the point I'm trying to make is that flying seems like something that is just as trivial as driving is for us. So it's not like Rey hopped into a jet from the United States Air Force that would take years to learn. The Falcon is probably the equivalent of a big truck or something that is really fast. But let's say it's not that simple. Fine. How does Rey learn how to fly the Falcon, especially since she never flew it before? Well, for a ship she never flew before, she sure as hell does know a lot about it. She makes comments about how the ship hasn't flown in years, she knew exactly where the cockpit was and where the gunner positions were, she knew how Unkar Plutt put a compressor on the ignition line that she felt put too much stress on the hyperdrive, she was able to bypass the compressor when there were many problems with the hyperdrive, and she knew that Unkar Plutt stole the Falcon from the Irving boys who stole it from Duquesne, whoever the hell these people are. My point is, Rey certainly has a lot of knowledge about the Falcon's history with Unkar Plutt and the mechanics behind it, so even though she might never have flown it, she definitely knows her way around the ship and how it works. Again, her knowing a lot about the ship doesn't automatically mean she knows how to fly it, but because this is a movie, this is something we can logically infer. It's not a huge leap in logic that a person who knows a lot about a ship knows how to fly it. Yes, she's never flown the ship before, but she clearly states she's flown other ships before. Say I was someone who loved driving cars, and I studied this one car a lot, but I've never driven it. Since I have good driving experience, I would probably be fairly decent at driving that car the first time I ever actually drove it. Again, this is not a big leap in logic, but to some people I guess it is. But even if that's not enough, even if all those reasons I point to still make you think she should not be able to fly the Falcon that well, I would actually like to go to the scene. I feel like people remember this scene radically different than what actually happened. She doesn't fly the Falcon like Han in the asteroid field or Chewie on Crate. She actually does a pretty poor job for the most part. Can we just watch the way she takes off? Let's count the amount of times she manages to hit something while taking off. Yeah man, she's a really excellent pilot. It's totally normal for a really good pilot to hit something that many times just while taking off. So yeah, Rey is off to a rocky start, which makes perfect sense considering she never flew the Falcon before. Now let's look at what happens next. She takes off and Finn tells her to stay low because it confuses the TIE fighter's tracking. She does a flip that I guess is kind of impressive, but not really considering she's in an open area and she almost hits the ground. Then the two TIE fighters show up. Now it's time for me to readdress the double standard. The standard that Rey is held to compared to Anakin and Luke is ridiculous. Let's start with Luke. People say Rey's backstory doesn't match her skill set, but can we talk about Luke here? Luke was a damn farmer his whole life. He was no engineer really or a scavenger, but a farmer. His only flying experience was a T-16, which, let's be real, he probably never flew in any kind of combat before. So even if he has the most basic skill set to fly something, is it realistic that he manages to fight in a battle against a military grade force? Is it realistic that he goes against dozens of TIE fighters? Is it realistic that he manages to survive an attack from Darth Vader? Is it realistic that he made a 1 in a million shot? Is it realistic that he was only one of 4 pilots to manage to survive this attack, while trained pilots could not? People give slack to Luke for this, but Rey manages to survive an attack against 2 TIE fighters, and it's unrealistic? Now, let's move on to Anakin, because his is much worse. For one, Anakin is 9 years old in The Phantom Menace. 9 years old. He manages to win the pod race after not even managing to finish one before in his life. Then he manages to fly into space having no knowledge of the controls and manages to destroy the capital ship accidentally while all the trained pilots could not do that. Like, in what world is what Rey did more impressive than what Anakin did? I just really don't understand. I really don't. Honestly, that last point about Luke and Anakin should be enough, but let's continue anyway. For literally a majority of this fight, she is just flying in an open field of sand. Again, nothing even remotely impressive for a character in Star Wars. Also, I just wanted to point out that Luke and Anakin both had the burden of also being in charge of the guns, while in this case, Finn is in charge while Rey just needs to focus on flying. She makes like 2 somewhat cool turns, I guess, before going into the Star Destroyer, but is that really impressive? No. She flies through the Star Destroyer, which is pretty impressive, and then does the cool flip at the end, which I will give is really impressive. Even if very few pilots can make the move that Rey did, can we please stop diminishing the effect the Force has on being a pilot? The Force literally gives people godlike reflexes. How do you think the Jedi are able to block blaster shots? How do you think Kylo Ren was able to freeze a bullet right after it was shot? Reflexes, I feel like, are one of the most important things when being a pilot. So even though she has very minimal training with the Force, it's literally the same exact reason Anakin won the pod race. Qui-Gon even says how only Jedi can have quick enough reflexes to win a pod race. So yeah, considering Rey is super strong with the Force, I can totally see her flying through the Star Destroyer and making this flip. I also wanted to point out one last time, do people realize this is the only time in the entire trilogy we see Rey fly in combat? Like, sure, she flies to Jakku at the end of this movie, but I'm talking about combat-wise, where she's actively getting shot at. In The Rise of Skywalker, we only see her fly when she's leaving a planet or arriving at one, so people make her out to be this amazing pilot when in the whole trilogy she makes like one impressive move. And by the way, her with Chewie on Crate does not count because she is not flying the Falcon, Chewie is. I've also heard people say that throughout this movie Rey is constantly saving other people, and in this scene Rey had to save Finn. Do people not realize that these two had to work together in order to escape? Yeah, if Rey wasn't there, Finn couldn't have escaped, but let's not act like if Finn wasn't there, Rey could have escaped. There's a difference between saving someone and working together to escape. Rey and Finn clearly worked together to escape here. This was not all 100% on Rey. Anyway, considering this is the only time we really see Rey flying during combat, I probably won't address her being a pilot again. They proceed to go into space and they have this cute little interaction where, again, Rey tells Finn she's flown ships before. There's some mechanical problem that occurs and they try to go fix it. This scene is another example of the storytellers showing us that Rey has an engineering background rather than her straight up telling us that she is an engineer. She notices there's a problem with the motivator and asks for a Harris wrench. Later on, she asks for a Pilex driver and then bonding tape. I don't even know if these are actual types of tools or not, but the point is the girl clearly knows her stuff. She even knows how the propulsion tank will overflow and fill the ship with poisonous gas. Again, storytelling 101, show, don't tell. Her knowing the names of all these obscure tools along with the names of certain parts of the ship shows us that she has an engineering background. This is much more effective than her just telling us that she's an engineer. The next somewhat important thing in this scene is Rey telling Finn she needs to go back to Jakku. This is just more evidence of her flaw in this film. Even when Finn asks her why she wants to go back, she tells him it's none of his business.
Boyfriend? Cute boyfriend?
None of your business, that's why.
Of course she doesn't want to tell him that she was abandoned by her parents and that she needs them to come back. This is something she is insecure about, so she sure as hell wouldn't tell someone that she just met about it. So yeah, just another smaller example of how flawed Rey really is. Han Solo and Chewbacca arrive and find Rey and Finn. One criticism against Rey during this whole movie was that all the characters instantly liked her, and besides Finn, this isn't the case at all. When Han first meets Rey, he intends on shipping her off to some planet because he doesn't even want her around. It's only after she tells Han about the map to Luke Skywalker that he takes any interest in her. And then in the following scenes, she proves her worth to him. After all, that is when he offers her a job on the Falcon, after she has shown she's very useful to him. Notice how he didn't offer Finn a job? Because he didn't do jack to help out the situation. All Finn did during the Rathtar fiasco was get caught and scream, and then later on he helped put a band-aid on Chewie. So yeah, Finn wasn't really that useful here, but let's look at what Rey did. So after the space pirates find Han Solo, Rey and Finn realize they are in some trouble. So Rey attempts to try and close off certain doors so Han and Chewie can get back to the Falcon safely. However, her plan doesn't work because she accidentally opens the wrong doors and lets the Rathtars loose. Rey made a mistake. She screwed up and almost got Finn killed. This is literally not what a Mary Sue does by any means, but people seem to negate this fact. One counter argument I've heard is that letting out the Rathtars ended up working better than Rey's original plan because the Rathtars ended up eating most of the pirates anyway and the whole crew was able to escape. For one, you don't know this. Had Rey closed the doors properly, then maybe they could have all just walked out without any problems. But instead, Finn almost died and Chewie got shot. Now, I've also heard that Rey saving Finn is another example of her being a Mary Sue, that she magically learned how to use the controls of the ship and happened to close the doors at the right time. People who claim this, I honestly believe, are just reaching for things to complain about. This control panel is probably like any standard security system. She probably just typed in the number of the screen she was looking at or something so she could try to close the door at the right time. And for her getting lucky with closing the door on the Rathtar's arm, do people not understand what the Force does to a person? As I said when I was discussing her flying the Falcon, the Force heightens one's reflexes to an insane amount, and can sometimes even allow the person to see things before they happen, just like what Qui-Gon said to Anakin. Again, how do you think the Jedi are able to block blaster shots? Because of their insane reflexes and being able to predict where shots will go with the Force. And for those who say she doesn't have any training yet so she can't use the Force, probably haven't watched The Phantom Menace before. Qui-Gon says how only a human with Jedi reflexes can win this pod race. Also, there have been so many times where people have used the Force in the most minuscule way with no training. Remember that baby Rodian in the Clone Wars that was able to make a ball float? Or how Baby Yoda literally uses the Force a bunch of times throughout The Mandalorian? And to those who say Yoda's species is stronger with the Force than humans, there is no factual evidence to support this claim. And I'm gonna bring this up again later. So yeah, people can use the Force in fairly basic ways with having no training or no knowledge of the Force. So after Rey saves Finn, they all leave on the Falcon and escape. Now, just like always, there are more Mary Sue complaints during this part. When they are leaving, Han is having some trouble jumping into lightspeed. Rey points out to him to hit the compressor, and when Han does it, it works and they are able to leave. Now, on the surface, this is actually a good example of what a Mary Sue is. This is Han's ship, and someone else telling Han how it works is something that probably shouldn't happen. But since people who claim Rey's a Mary Sue love to nitpick these movies, I'm going to do the same thing in my advantage. Notice how all the problems that Han supposedly needs help with revolve around this compressor. Before they take off, Rey reminds him to hit the compressor, and when they are having problems in hyperspace, Rey bypasses the compressor. Now, do you also remember when Han was in the cockpit for the first time? He points out how some moof milker put a compressor on the ignition line. This implies that the compressor wasn't there before when Han had the Falcon in the original trilogy. And Rey clearly knows it because she not only knows who put it on, but that she thought it was a mistake too when it was put on. So in reality, Rey doesn't know more about the Falcon than Han does, she just knows more about the one thing that was added to it while Han was not in possession of the Falcon. This was a pretty clever way to make Rey help Han without having to seem like she knows more about the entire ship than Han does. Actually, this whole compressor thing is kind of underlooked. They both mentioned how the compressor puts too much stress on the hyperdrive, and once the ship enters hyperspace for the first time in years, there are a bunch of problems. So what does Rey do? Bypass the compressor, which solves the problem, because based on their exchange earlier, she knew the compressor would be a problem when entering hyperspace. So to those who say J.J. Abrams puts no thinking into his movies, clearly didn't notice this little detail. Afterwards, they all gather together and they talk about Luke and the Force. Now, Rey doesn't really do anything here, but there are a few things I'd like to note. When Han questions that they are fugitives, Rey tells him that Finn is with the Resistance and that she's just a scavenger. This might be a small throwaway line to some, but I see this as more than that. One of Rey's biggest struggles in this trilogy is her accepting that she can be something special without other people's approval or who she is related to. So here, when she just refers to herself by her occupation as a scavenger, it says a lot about how she views herself. I'm just a scavenger and nothing more. That's probably how she viewed herself for most of her life, so it makes sense that later on, she has problems accepting that she is special. The other thing is the look of amazement on her face when she says the Jedi were real. I think this shows it's more than just a myth to her, or what she thought was a myth. These are stories that she's heard a lot about. It's also kind of neat that she goes from not even knowing the Jedi were real to claiming that she's all the Jedi by the end of The Rise of Skywalker. Nothing big, but I enjoy little things like that. So they arrive on Takodana and Han and Rey have a nice little exchange. Now, people like to point to this exchange as another example of her being a Mary Sue. Since Han and Chewie both like her and Han gives her a gun, this is a supposed example of all the characters in a story liking her, which is a trait of a Mary Sue. But can we not act like Rey didn't prove herself that she would be useful to Han on numerous occasions? She clearly knows the Falcon fairly well and is also a decent pilot. Why wouldn't Han want to bring her on as crew? Now, you could say that they just met, but there's something about Rey that just screams innocence to me. I can't picture that Han thinks this girl is dangerous and is a threat to him and Chewie. So yeah, let's not act like it's completely unfathomable that Han would want to hire Rey as a part of his crew. Another small thing about this scene that I always laugh at is Rey's response when Han gives her the blaster. He asks her if she knows how to use it and she says, "Yeah, you pull the trigger." Now, I have never shot a real gun before, but I have friends that are really into guns, and if I said that to them the first time shooting, they would probably freak out. Han even has a similar response. Also, this is probably just a filmmaking mistake, but am I the only one who ever noticed that Rey is closing the wrong eye here? Like, I've played with Nerf guns before, and I'm pretty sure that the eye you open is on the same side as the arm with the gun. So Mary Sue Rey is so good at everything, but doesn't even know how to use a gun right. Han even has to remind her to keep the gun down and not holding it, pointing it at everyone. Again, I've never shot a gun before, but even I know you're not supposed to be pointing the gun at people when you're not using it. And later on, she manages to forget to turn off the safety. Kinda surprised that there's something like this in Star Wars anyway, but nonetheless, she forgot to turn off the safety. So they go inside and talk to Maz. Rey doesn't really do anything here, but I do like how she's the only one eating. The girl is probably starving, so this was a cute thing to see from me. So she has her emotional talk with Finn after he leaves, and then she has her vision. Now, I've heard people argue that this is another example of her being a Mary Sue because the Force just happened to call to her. Now, this is kind of hard to argue because we still don't exactly know what happened with her Force vision. We don't know why the Force led her to the lightsaber and why she had that vision, and it's unlike anything we've ever seen before in Star Wars, really. There is that ability in Fallen Order that Cal has where he can see the past of an object, but in this case we don't just see the past of an object, we see the past and the future. All I can say against the Mary Sue argument is that this basically happened to Luke and Anakin too. They didn't have Force visions per se, but extraordinary coincidences led them to journeys into the Force. A message sent by his sister happened to end up on the doorstep of Luke, and a Jedi Master who loved to study prophecies happened to land on Tatooine and happened to find the supposed Chosen One. As Qui-Gon said, nothing happens by accident, and it was the will of the Force that he meant Anakin. So I guess my counter would be that it was simply just the will of the Force that Rey found the lightsaber. It's not really the best counter argument, but I don't see how this would make Rey a Mary Sue anyway. The scene after Rey has her Force vision is probably the most important scene in the movie, and it's a scene that no one ever talks about. So Rey is freaked out by her vision and tells Maz that she shouldn't have gone in there and that she needs to go back to Jakku. Maz responds by telling her, "You already know the truth, whoever you're waiting for on Jakku, they're never coming back," and Rey proceeds to cry. This shows us that deep down, Rey knows her parents aren't coming back. She's been in denial about this for like 10 years now. If her parents don't come back, then that means that Rey isn't important to anyone, not even her own parents, which is one of her biggest fears at this point in the story. As I said earlier, Her biggest flaw in at least The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi is her need for external validation. Rey is so desperate for her parents to come back that she is willing to waste her life away on a planet she hates. This is a huge flaw for a character to have. One thing I love about the sequel trilogy is that in each movie, Rey hears the worst possible thing. In The Rise of Skywalker, Rey is insecure about her relationship to the dark side and whether or not she's worthy of becoming a Jedi. So what happens? She finds out she's the granddaughter of the literal archetype of the devil. In The Last Jedi, she wants her parents to be important so she can have easy answers in her path as a Jedi. But what happens? Her parents were nobody. In The Force Awakens, Rey wants her parents to come back to her. So what is she told? That her parents are never coming back. Even when Maz tells Rey that there is someone who still could come back to her, she instantly puts her hopes and dreams into Luke to be that parental figure for her. Maz tells Rey the most important thing that she needs to hear, that the belonging she seeks is not behind her, but ahead. But Rey hasn't accepted this yet. When Maz tells her to take the lightsaber, she literally just runs away scared. Rey her whole life just wanted to find belonging, and now she's also told to become a Jedi? Rey's like, screw that. She just wants to find her parents, and she is not ready to begin a journey of becoming a warrior all on her own. I don't understand how people can watch this scene and think she's a Mary Sue. She just ran away into the middle of the forest because she's scared of becoming a Jedi without guidance. Like, girl, where are you going? A Mary Sue would 100% just pick up that lightsaber and save the day for everyone. A Mary Sue does not run away from a challenge or any responsibility. Rey running into the forest because she is scared is probably the most non-Mary Sue thing you could possibly do. But knowing people, they'll probably find some lame reason why this is her being a Mary Sue anyway. Anyway, moving on, Rey runs around the forest scared for a bit, chats with BB-8 quickly, and then the First Order arrives. She takes out her gun and kills 3 people. Only 3 people. But yeah, she's a Mary Sue because she magically knows how to use a gun. Bro, didn't Luke and Leia kill like a bunch more people on the Death Star? And they were using actual blasters, not the little pistol-looking blasters that Rey had. Also, can we stop acting like not every main character in every Star Wars movie has serious plot armor? Like, at this point, it's a meme. But sure, Rey shoots 3 people, and that's significantly more unrealistic than Anakin accidentally blowing up a whole spaceship. And if you're wondering why I keep on bringing up other characters, it's because Rey is the only one who gets called a Mary Sue, when literally so many other characters, especially Luke and Anakin, do the same thing. The double standard for Rey is insane. We next see Rey running through the forest before her first encounter with Kylo Ren. This is another excellent scene that shows Rey is clearly not a Mary Sue. Rey proceeds to run away scaredly from Kylo before getting force frozen. He mind reads her before ultimately just putting her to sleep with the motion of his hand. Everything that happens to Rey is the exact opposite of what an actual Mary Sue would do in this situation. A Mary Sue would not be scared of an enemy, a Mary Sue would not run away from an enemy, a Mary Sue would not allow the enemy to use a special ability to freeze them, a Mary Sue would not be knocked out by the wave of a hand, and especially a Mary Sue would not be captured and would not be in need of being rescued. I honestly believe people who call Rey a Mary Sue pick and choose what they want from these movies to support their argument. Like, look at that scene where Rey flies the Falcon for the first time, she's a Mary Sue, but let's completely ignore the scenes where Rey's at her most emotionally vulnerable and her biggest flaw is exposed. Or let's forget to look at the scenes where Kylo just completely takes advantage of Rey. Yeah, I really do believe people definitely just pick and choose these scenes that they want to support their argument. After a few scenes, we are now on Starkiller Base, and we start with the interrogation scene. Now, this scene is also used as an example of Rey being a Mary Sue, because she was not only able to resist Kylo Ren, but also able to read his mind back. Now sure, at the time of The Force Awakens' release, this was a little bit much. The complexities of reading one's mind was first introduced in this movie, so we don't exactly know how complicated or not it is to do. Anyway, after the release of The Rise of Skywalker, their encounters make much more sense here. This scene is where the famous dyad in the Force was formed. As stated in The Rise of Skywalker, a dyad in the Force is when 2 individual people have a bond so strong they serve as one in the Force. Their bond is so strong that they can not only communicate over space and time, but interact over space and time as well. One incredible feature of this bond is that the two can basically know each other at a very deep level. They know each other's hopes, dreams, fears, and most importantly, insecurities. So during this scene, it isn't so much Rey reading his mind, but the bond of the two beginning to form. The two don't know it yet, but the prophesized dyad is being formed during this scene. This is why Rey is able to see what's in his mind, and he's able to do the same to her. Now, if you want to claim that this is unfair that Rey became this strong this quickly because of the dyad, then you can make that argument. But to say she is a Mary Sue means that this power breaks the laws of the universe, which it doesn't. Granted, the dyad wasn't introduced at the time, but the sequels did lay a foundation that now allows The Force Awakens to make more sense. A dyad is now part of the canon, and it doesn't break any of the rules of the Force. Introducing new Force abilities is okay as long as it doesn't undermine other aspects of the Force, and I don't think the dyad does that. So Rey isn't just super competent with everything, she's just forming the bond that allows her to become incredibly close to Kylo Ren emotionally, and that is how she was able to mentally resist Kylo and read his mind back. Now, this scene ties directly into the Jedi mind trick scene, which is the next scene. Now, of all the feats that Rey is able to accomplish in this movie, this is the one that is the most overpowered in my opinion, but that doesn't necessarily mean she is automatically a Mary Sue. As we know from earlier in the movie, Rey is very familiar with the Jedi and their history. She's heard stories about the Jedi and what they can do. It's almost a certainty that Rey at least knows what a Jedi mind trick is. Now, one could say that just because someone has heard of something, that doesn't mean they could automatically know how to do it, and that's a fair point. But let's look at the context of this scene. A few minutes ago, Rey learned that she was not only strong with the Force, but also learned that she was able to prevent Kylo from reading her mind, and she was able to read his mind back. When you think about it, a Jedi mind trick is not all that different than reading someone's mind. Yeah, one is forcing someone to do something and the other is reading one's thoughts, but they both involve entering someone else's mind. So it doesn't seem like a huge leap in logic that Rey would try to do something like this. If I one day woke up and realized I was strong with the Force, I would definitely try and Jedi mind trick someone. Also, there is nothing in the canon that suggests that a Jedi mind trick is something that is a difficult task for a Force user to accomplish. All you're doing is entering someone else's mind, so it's not like Rey heard stories of some incredible feat that only a few people have ever accomplished. She probably heard stories about how almost all the Jedi could do a simple mind trick, and when she realized she was strong with the Force, she wanted to try it. And it's not like Rey was able to master it instantly. It took her a few tries until she was successful in her attempt. I've heard people say that when Rey tells a stormtrooper to drop his weapon, that it is even more OP because she's doing the mind trick twice. To me, I've always seen this as her just remaining inside his head the whole time. We've seen Jedi make more than one command before while doing the mind trick, so it didn't seem out of the ordinary to me. One more thing, it's not like Luke ever got training for how to do a Jedi mind trick either. Yeah, there was a year's worth of time between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, but where did he learn to do this? It's heavily implied that Luke did not return to Yoda between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, and since Yoda and Luke were the last Jedi, then how did he learn this? Did he have a book to learn from? Well, none of it's explained in the movie, so I guess we'll never know, but somehow Luke went from this to this without a master, so I guess we'll never know how Luke managed to progress so fast in his training. Anyway, after Rey escapes, she wanders around Starkiller Base for a bit. She looks for a way to escape and notices the TIE fighter. However, stormtroopers are approaching, so she climbs on the side of a huge wall and enters inside it. This scene is very reminiscent of her opening scene when she was climbing through the Star Destroyer. Now, I will be willing to bet money that not a single person watching this video can make that climb that she made. The amount of upper body strength it takes to make this kind of climb is ridiculous. Now, people would probably say this is her being a Mary Sue, but the movie literally sets the foundation for why she would need to be so good at climbing in dangerous places. She's a scavenger, and after 30 years, I wouldn't be surprised if these Star Destroyers were close to being stripped clean. She's going to have to go to hard-to-reach places to find materials that were never scavenged before. So this part of the scene makes perfect sense. After wandering around a little bit more, she runs into Han, Finn, and Chewie. Chewie tells Rey that it was Finn's idea to rescue her, and she gives him a hug. Now, I think people underestimate the importance of this moment. Remember a little while ago when Rey had trouble accepting that her parents were never coming back, and Maz tells her that there is someone who still could? Rey assumed this meant Luke, but what if it was supposed to be a more open-ended question than that? Maz tells her that the belonging she seeks is not behind her, but it is ahead. What if this meant that the people who are willing to come back for you are not from your past, but your friends that will be there for you in the future? Her parents never came back for her, but Finn did. I think this is the moment where she realizes that she needs to let go of Jakku and the return of her parents, that her family is with these people, not the people who abandoned her when she was younger. So I hope people start to realize how important this moment is in Rey's whole story. When Finn asks her how she was able to escape, she says that she can't explain it and that he wouldn't believe it. This shows that Rey is really surprised by her new abilities. It's not something she's all really that confident in yet. I felt that was important to note. Anyway, they proceed to go blow open a hole in the oscillator that is holding all of the energy from the sun, and Han runs into Kylo. Kylo kills his father and proceeds to meet Rey and Finn in the forest, and we get the lightsaber fight. Now, just like the Falcon scene early on in this movie, I already made a whole video on this scene, so I'm going to be repeating some of the points I made in that video, but let's begin. Oh, and by the way, I think Rey winning this fight makes perfect sense. Now, in order for me to make my point, I feel it's important to address the criticisms against this fight. So the single main criticism of this duel, I would say, revolves around Rey's levels of training and her strength in the Force. Given the levels of training both Kylo Ren and Rey have, it seems obvious that Kylo should win. Kylo Ren is the grandson of Darth Vader, has been training under Luke Skywalker his whole life, and he's been training for a few years to use the dark side. Rey, on the other hand, is a scavenger who has some fighting experience with a staff, has never held a lightsaber, and just found out that she can use the Force in just an hour or so. So given these descriptions, it should be obvious that Kylo Ren should win this fight, but given the context of what's going on in the story, I don't think it's that simple. I'm going to make a few points that are common arguments and then address the counters, and then I will make a point I feel no one makes. So the first factor that many people love to bring up is the bowcaster wound. Just after Kylo Ren killed his father, Chewbacca shot a bowcaster right at his torso. The film established on a few occasions how powerful this weapon is, even managing to blow up more than one stormtrooper at once. So in all reality, Kylo Ren should probably be dead, but regardless, he persists. So immediately this should put Kylo at an extreme disadvantage. If you look at all the films, no one has ever had such a strong injury and still proceeded to fight. In Attack of the Clones, Obi-Wan gets 2 measly cuts and falls to the ground, while Kylo Ren takes on 2 more people after he's shot with the bowcaster. One could argue that the bowcaster shot is much more deadly than 2 non-fatal cuts from a lightsaber. And if lightsaber cuts are so bad, Kylo also received one from Finn and still proceeded to fight Rey after that. Now that I think about it, I think Kylo deserves a lot more credit for his durability during this fight. And besides this fight, no one has ever really been injured during a fight and continued on during that fight. I would not count Vader as being constantly injured because that's just how he is. A counter argument I have heard to this is that the injury should make him stronger, since it would make him stronger with the dark side of the Force because he's experiencing pain. Now bear with me, but I'm going to address this point later on in the video. But overall, even though the bowcaster point is brought up a lot, I feel it's still not given the credit it deserves. Now let's look at Rey. Besides being knocked out by being flown into a tree that should have probably broken her back, she seems to be rather healthy entering this fight. Granted, people in Star Wars have received worse injuries and seemed fine, so I wouldn't give too much emphasis to this point. Rey uses the Force to pull the lightsaber to her. Now, people who complain about her simply using Force pull is a little silly. Pulling or pushing something with the Force is the most basic Force skill, but if you want to be really nitpicky about it, then I'm going to bring up some simple physics. If Kylo is pulling the lightsaber at X amount of Force, and Rey is pulling the lightsaber at Y amount of Force, it doesn't necessarily mean that Rey is stronger at the moment. What it does mean is that the lightsaber is moving much faster than Kylo anticipated, so it would make sense that he was not prepared to catch it. It's like if you were playing baseball with a friend and they said they were going to lob you the ball and said they threw it as fast as they could. You wouldn't be expecting that. So now that Rey has the lightsaber, let's analyze her ability to fight. Yes, Rey has never indeed wielded a lightsaber before, and yes, staff combat doesn't necessarily translate into sword combat, but let's look at Rey's life. Rey was probably never formally trained in staff combat. She had to defend herself her whole life basically from thugs who were trying to rob her. So I would estimate that there have been over 100 encounters where one or more people have tried to jump her or something. The first years of her life on Jakku, where she was like 10, she probably got beaten up very often until she learned how to properly defend herself. Rey's probably been a defensive fighter her whole life, given it doesn't seem to be in her nature to initiate an attack on someone else. So given that Rey has decades worth of experience from defending herself, and given that she probably has excellent footwork and fundamentals, I don't find it far-fetched that she's able to at least defend herself against Kylo. Let's actually look at the beginning of the fight. Rey initiates by making these stabbing attacks, which is already similar to her staff combat, I suppose. But after like 10 seconds, Rey is on the defensive for the whole fight until she's on the cliff. Defense is where Rey thrives, and watching her run away from Kylo the whole fight plays into her backstory perfectly. One aspect that should be noted is that while Rey's on the defensive, Kylo isn't necessarily on the offensive. Yes, he's the one that's chasing Rey around, but let's remember that Kylo is not trying to kill Rey. He's honestly probably not even trying to injure her. He just wants to at worst disarm her so he can take her back to Snoke. So yes, I believe if Kylo really did want to kill Rey, he could have done so in this fight rather easily. Now before I address the second part of the fight, which takes place after Rey gets away from the edge of the cliff, I wanted to introduce something I feel can accurately describe strength in the Force, and that is the Force Parabola. Now you might be thinking, what the hell is this? Well, let me explain. Think of the x-axis as the side of the Force you are on. The more right you are, the stronger you are with the light side of the Force. The more on the left side you are, the stronger you are with the dark side of the Force. And think of the y-axis as overall power. The higher you are, the stronger you are. The lower you are, the weaker you are. So basically I'm trying to say that the more committed you are to a certain side of the Force, the stronger you will be. But if you are more conflicted and you can't really choose a side, then you are most likely not going to be as powerful. Prior to Rey being up against the cliff, she's probably somewhere around here. She hasn't really tapped into the Force yet, and she's pretty much just running around. But once she remembers to tap in the Force, she instantly skyrockets to somewhere around here, because she does have a lot of raw power. One could even argue that she's somewhere around here considering she is using some of the dark side towards the end of this fight. Now looking at Kylo, given the context of the movie, he's probably somewhere around here. Now you may be pretty surprised, but this brings up a point that I feel no one mentions. Kylo Ren is emotionally compromised. The act of killing his father made him tremendously weaker in that moment. Just look at his face. This is not the face of someone who is strong with the dark side. Remember how in the beginning of the film Kylo was fast enough to freeze Poe's blaster shot? Well, he was so caught off guard by his feelings, he couldn't do the same to Chewbacca's shot. If that's not enough, then remember it is emphasized numerous times in the next two films how the act of killing his father weakened him tremendously.
I see through the cracks in your mask. You're haunted. You can't stop saying what you did to your father.
Remember those conversations with Snoke?
And look at you. The deed split your spirit to the bone. You were unbalanced, bested by a girl who had never held a lightsaber. You failed!
Yeah, me too. I would honestly believe this is the single most important reason why he lost this fight. Kylo during this fight was too conflicted to commit to the dark side. In a perfect world, the bowcaster wound should have helped him out, but since he's conflicted, the wound just became a burden. So with Rey having a much stronger connection to the Force in this moment, it's not surprising she was able to overpower him. And it's not like Rey is fighting with much grace here either, she's just hacking and whacking at Kylo, simply just overpowering him. This shot right here represents the light side overpowering the dark side in this moment. So given Kylo Ren was extremely injured and emotionally compromised, and given that Rey does have a strong defensive skill set and is much more committed to the Force in this moment, it is not surprising that she won this fight. Now I do believe that the debate on who should have won this fight will go on forever, but hopefully I stated my case in an effective way. Now for the rest of the movie, Rey doesn't really do much. She leaves Starkiller Base and lands on Dakar, she gives Leia a big hug and then says goodbye to Finn, Leia and BB-8 before embarking on a journey to find Luke. I've heard people say that Leia should have gone on the trip to find Luke, not Rey, but I disagree with this. Yeah, Leia would have probably had an easier time convincing Luke to leave the island and help in the fight, but Leia couldn't abandon the Resistance. She is their leader, and based on the beginning of The Last Jedi, they knew they had to evacuate quickly. During a time of crisis, everyone looks towards their leader, so Leia definitely couldn't just leave them after the events of The Force Awakens. Rey leaves, arrives on Jakku, and finds Luke, and the movie ends. Now that is it for The Force Awakens. But don't leave yet, we are only done with one film in this trilogy. We still got 2 more, so let's continue. Now, of the 3 films in this trilogy, The Last Jedi is the one that features Rey the least, having her lowest screen time by far. So The Last Jedi won't be discussed as much as the other 2 films, but I definitely have a lot to say. Now, Rey's first few scenes doesn't have her doing much. She hands Luke the lightsaber and he tosses it away. She goes to Luke's little hut, and when he doesn't answer, she brings Chewie to knock down the door. She tells Luke that they need to leave. Luke asks Rey where's Han, and then Rey summarizes the events of The Force Awakens to him. She tells him how much the galaxy needs him and the Jedi Order back, but he tells her to screw off and goes through his daily routine, including drinking the infamous green milk. Remember how many people said that people loving her so quickly is a Mary Sue trait in The Force Awakens? Well, here Luke definitely doesn't seem to like her, so here's to debunking that criticism. I also found it quite interesting how Rey follows Luke around in the beginning portion of this movie. It's kinda a childish thing to do when you think about it. She needs Luke and he tells her to screw off, so she's just gonna try and follow him around until he gets fed up and begins to train her. It shows how desperately Rey needs Luke. Remember from The Force Awakens, she's gotten over her parents never returning to Jakku, but she is still searching for that external validation. She simply just shifted her focus from her parents to, hopefully, Luke. She really needs that external validation from Luke, and he's not giving it to her. This is really frustrating for Rey because she's not here to just follow Luke around. Rey genuinely needs help, and Luke isn't giving it to her. We especially see this when they enter the Force Tree. Now, a completely random side note, but did this part remind anyone of Alien and Aliens? When I first saw this, the music sounded identical, but maybe it's just me. So they enter the tree. Rey talks about how she's seen this place in her dreams.
You've seen this place. You've seen this island.
Only in dreams.
This is actually a really neat continuation of the interrogation scene in The Force Awakens. Kylo says that he sees an ocean and an island in her head, and here she says she's seen this tree. This kind of implies that it's the will of the Force that Rey becomes a Jedi. She was destined for this her whole life, and why else would Rey be having dreams about this specific island? Now, this part of the scene I really like, and it says a lot about Rey's character. Luke asks her who she is, and she responds by saying the Resistance Center. She's kind of deflecting his question here. When he asks why she is here, she again responds by saying the Resistance Center. Luke emphasizes that he wants to know why she is here, and not someone else. It takes time for Rey to answer this question because it isn't an easy question for her to answer. In The Force Awakens, she kept on telling people that she needs to get back to Jakku, but never told anyone why. Whenever asked why, she would reject and answer by saying it's none of your business, and when Maz confronted her with how her parents were never coming back, she ran away scared. Rey never admitted to anyone that she needs that someone in her life that will be there for her unconditionally, so when she answers Luke's question, it says a lot about her.
And I'm afraid. I don't know what it is, what to do with it, and I need help.
She says something inside her has always been there, and she's afraid and that she needs help. Just something to note, Mary Sues are never afraid and they never need help. So how could Rey be one if she just said that she is afraid and she needs help? Anyway, Luke tells her she needs a teacher and that the Jedi must end. After Luke shares a wonderful scene with R2, he agrees to teach Rey 3 lessons that represent why the Jedi must end. Unfortunately, we only get to see 2 because the third scene is a deleted scene, and that's really unfortunate because the third lesson actually says a lot about Rey, but since it's a deleted scene, I'll address it in the external materials portion of this video. But anyway, before we get to see the first lesson, we see Rey and Kylo's first Force bond, and I love this scene. Nothing much happens here because neither of the characters know what the hell is going on. The only thing that is really established is that both characters aren't doing this and neither is Luke. Also, the two can't harm each other. From the Rise of Skywalker, we know that this is just a result of their dyad and their bond is beginning to grow stronger. Now, I genuinely don't know if people think her having this bond is her being a Mary Sue or not, but I don't know how this could be an example of that when it's something that is completely out of her control. One cool thing about this scene is Kylo mentions to Rey that she can't be doing this because the effort would kill her. This is a nice tie-in to the end of the movie when Luke projects himself. It also shows how much tunnel vision Kylo had at the end of this movie because he is aware of this Force ability but was too angry to notice it. Anyway, their first encounter gets cut short and Luke wants to begin Rey's first lesson. When they get to the little cliff, there is something interesting about the way Rey talks to Luke here.
We need you to bring the Jedi back because Kylo Ren is strong with the dark side of the Force. Without the Jedi, we won't stand a chance against him.
She says, we need you to bring the Jedi Order back because Kylo Ren is strong with the dark side of the Force. Without the Jedi, we don't stand a chance against him. Now, it's not what's said here, but how it is said. The way Rey says this sounds very rehearsed, like someone told her to tell Luke this information. Now, some people have pointed to this as bad acting on the part of Daisy Ridley, but I don't believe that. I think the delivery of this line was intentional because Rey doesn't really believe what she is saying. Now, I'm not saying she believes the opposite, but this was just something she was told, not something she genuinely believes. Rey doesn't even know what a Jedi really is. This is why Luke questions her and asks, what do you know about the Jedi? She responds with the funny line, it's a power that Jedi have that allows them to control people and make things float. While this scene was played off for some laughs, I do believe this says a lot about Rey. Rey doesn't understand the Force. To her, it's just something that was always there and she was able to tap into it in the previous movie. This establishes another one of her flaws, that she is pretty naive. In The Rise of Skywalker, she is more matured, but in The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, she's always making assumptions that are completely wrong. She trusts that Finn was with the Resistance, she's assuming she knows what the Force is, she sticks her hand out when Luke tells her to reach out, she's easily manipulated by a dude because he's hot, she assumes Kylo returned back to the light side just because she would go to him, and these are just a few examples, but to say that Rey is not naive in these first two movies is very hard to argue. And even though it's not a big flaw, being naive is still a flaw. There is no way the original Mary Sue from Star Trek would be naive about anything. If Rey was really a Mary Sue, she would have a complete understanding of what the Force is, but she clearly doesn't. Now, during the first lesson, we get a wonderful little scene that really shows what the Force is. People brush this scene off as Rey not learning anything, but they completely misunderstood this scene and what the Force is. The Force is not a power you have, it's an energy field that surrounds all living things. This is what is reiterated in both The Empire Strikes Back and The Last Jedi. One's strength in the Force comes from how well someone can tap into this energy field. It's not like something you level up like in a video game. Some people are just naturally better at connecting to this energy field than others, and this is the biggest difference between Luke and Rey. Rey, like Anakin, is naturally better at connecting to the Force than Luke was, and this is because both the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy are designed to be that way. And this is because Luke's journey has everything to do with his strength in the Force, and Rey's journey has very little to do with her strength in the Force. Let's examine this further. If you watched my video about Rey's introduction scene, you know I talked about John Truby's 4 narrative questions that are essential for a character arc. What is the character's want, need, lie, and ghost? For this video, I will just talk about a character's want and need. The want is the goal the character is trying to achieve, and the need is what the character needs to learn about themselves in order to achieve their want. Let's apply these to Luke and Rey in their respective trilogies. Luke's want is to learn the ways of the Force and become a Jedi like his father. That is his goal throughout the trilogy. His need is that he must have trust in himself and in the Force if he wants to become a Jedi. If you look at A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back, Luke's struggles all stem from him not trusting in himself or in the Force. It's not until Return of the Jedi where he tells Yoda and Obi-Wan that he will not murder his father and he will do whatever it takes to save him. Luke trusted in himself and he accomplished his goal. Now let's look at Rey. Now, depending on which movies you're looking at, Rey has different wants and needs, but overall I'd say her main ones that are consistent throughout the trilogy is that her want is to find belonging, and that her need is that she's not defined by her parents or by her bloodline, but by who she is as a person. Now, what do these wants and needs have to do with one's strength in the Force? Well, the key component of narrative drama is the character struggling to accomplish their want and how they need to learn their need by the end of the story. Luke's want and need have a strong relationship with the Force. Luke's want is to become a Jedi, so in order for him to have a compelling character arc, we need to see Luke struggling to achieve his want. Thus, Luke needs to struggle to become a Jedi. Even though Luke has all the raw power in the world, he's the only one holding himself back, which is why it appears he is weaker than Rey and Anakin. This is why in the span of 1 year, he's able to go from not even being able to lift an X-Wing to beating the Chosen One in a lightsaber fight. A good analogy for the Force would be a door, and yes, a door. And this analogy actually comes from Luke himself in a comic. Now, this is not me using external material to defend a movie, it's me using an analogy that I happened to hear from a Star Wars comic. The more open the door is, the stronger you are with the Force. Some people start with the door closed, making it harder for them to be as strong. Some people start with their door about halfway open, making them naturally stronger with the Force than others without training. Some people have an easier time opening their doors than others, and some people can open their doors all the way, while some people can only open it halfway. However, regardless of all this, anyone can open their door in some capacity. People like Anakin, Luke, and Rey start with their doors really wide open, but Anakin and Rey were faster at continuing to open their doors than Luke was. This is why someone with such a minuscule amount of training can defeat someone who is labeled the Chosen One. Luke's journey is about him struggling to open the door wider than where it started. Now let's look at Rey. Her want is about her finding belonging. In other words, she wants a family. Her struggling to find a family has nothing to do with her strength with the Force. We don't see Rey struggle that much with the Force because her struggle is all about her insecurity within herself. And this is what we see during the first lesson. Rey is naturally good at tapping into the Force, which is why she becomes so much stronger than Luke was. Luke even points out how much raw power she had, similar to Ben Solo.
I've seen this raw strength only once before. In Ben Solo. It didn't scare me enough then. It does now.
Speaking of which, her next scene is her second Force bond with Kylo. Just a quick thing, I love how she gets a little excited at touching the rain. It probably never rained on Jakku, so she would definitely appreciate this. Anyway, the two connect through their bond and they have another very revealing conversation. One thing I love about their attitudes is that it's sometimes the opposite of what we expect. Usually the Jedi is the one who is calm and collected, and it's the dark side user that is the aggressor. But in The Last Jedi, and more prominently in The Rise of Skywalker, Rey is usually the aggressor and Kylo is the one who is calm and collected. Just watch the duel on the second Death Star and tell me that Rey isn't the one fighting with anger and Kylo isn't the one who is calm and collected. So Kylo asks why the Force is connecting them, and Rey calls him a murderous snake. Now this is probably unintentional, but I like how she calls him a murderous snake, and then in the next movie she not only force heals a literal murderous snake, but also the person she called a murderous snake. Just a neat connection that I really like. Kylo asks Rey if Luke told her what happened the night he destroyed his temple, and this throws Rey off. Kylo asking Rey if Luke told her something implies that Luke is hiding something from Rey, something he doesn't want her to know, which makes sense considering he lies to her the first time he tells Rey what happened. Rey tells Kylo she knows everything she needs to know about him, and this shows a lot about her naivety. Rey wants to believe Kylo is just this evil person, but it's not that simple. There is so much more to Kylo's backstory that Rey doesn't know yet. So what this Force Bond scene really establishes is another example of how naive Rey really is. She's always willing to believe things that she wishes to be true rather than what's actually true. She wants to believe that her parents are coming back, but they aren't. She wants to believe that Finn is with the Resistance, but he isn't. She wants to believe that Luke is this perfect person, but he isn't. She wants to believe that Kylo is just this simply evil man, but he isn't. Rey choosing to believe things she wants to be true is a huge flaw, one flaw that a Mary Sue would not possess. At the end of their bond, Rey calls Kylo a monster, and he responds by saying, "Yes, I am." This response makes Rey genuinely uncomfortable because this is a very unusual response, and to me this hinted towards Rey that there is something going on with him, and there is. Kylo was told his whole life that he is a monster. His parents shipped him off to Luke, and Luke almost killed him. If people keep calling you a monster, especially your family, odds are that you are going to think you're a monster. And this is why Kylo thinks that, and this is also why Rey later on wants to help him, because she doesn't think Kylo is a monster, but someone who is deeply troubled and could be saved. Her next scene is her second lesson with Luke, which doesn't focus on Rey that much. Its main focus is on Luke. The only thing that affects Rey really in this scene is that she is told a lie about what happened the night Kylo destroyed Luke's temple, which ties directly into the third Force Bond scene. First of all, a Mary Sue would not be overwhelmed by seeing Adam Driver shirtless, so when Rey flusters here, it is the ultimate example of her not being a Mary Sue. But in all seriousness, this scene does actually show us a lot of Rey's flaws. Rey asks Kylo why he killed his father and that she doesn't understand. These next few exchanges are so important. I think people are too focused on a shirtless Adam Driver to understand what's going on. When she says, "I don't understand," he says,
"No, your parents threw you away like garbage."
They didn't.
They did, but you can't stop needing them.
"No, your parents threw you away like garbage," basically saying that she should understand. They were both abandoned by their parents. She responds by saying they didn't, because at this point in the story, Rey is still in denial about what happened with her parents. What Kylo says next is literally spelling out her biggest flaw. He says,
"They did, but you can't stop needing them. It's your greatest weakness. Looking for them everywhere, in Han Solo, now in Skywalker."
They did, but you can't stop needing them. It's your greatest weakness, looking for them everywhere, in Han Solo, now in Skywalker. Kylo literally spells out that Rey's greatest weakness is her need for her parents, and people have the audacity to watch this movie and say Rey has no flaws. He proceeds to tell her his point of view on the night he destroyed Luke's temple. I love Rey's response here. She calls him a liar, but the way she says it shows that she knows he is somewhat telling the truth. This is great acting on the part of Daisy Ridley in my opinion. Then Kylo gives her the famous "let the past die" speech before the scene ends. And one more thing, if you are someone who says "let the past die" is the theme of this movie, then you are something else. The philosophy of the villain is almost never the theme of the movie. The theme of Infinity War is not sacrificing half of humanity for the greater good of the other half. So I hope people realize that the theme of a movie like Star Wars is usually the exact opposite of the villain's philosophy or something similar to that. Immediately afterwards, she goes straight to the Force cave she saw earlier. She goes here because Luke mentioned how the cave had something she needed, and that something is the identity of her parents. One criticism that is often laid on Rey here is that she shouldn't be able to swim. Now, this is like one of the smallest nitpicks because Rey is swimming for less than 10 seconds, and it's not even that important to the scene. But sure, it's likely that Rey hadn't done any swimming. But it's not like Rey is swimming out in the ocean here, she falls like a few feet away from an edge. And if you zoom in, it's not like she's even swimming properly, she's kind of just doggy paddling for like 3 seconds towards the edge. Also, most people who can't swim and end up drowning do so because of panicking. Just because Rey may have never swam before, that doesn't mean she is necessarily afraid of large bodies of water. I've never been skydiving before, but I'm not afraid to do it. so I'm pretty sure any real athletic person who doesn't swim and isn't panicking could paddle to an edge that is less than 10 feet away. After she gets out of the water, she looks into the Force mirror to get more answers about her parents. Now, I'm not going to analyze what this mirror portion was trying to say, because it's not important to Rey being a Mary Sue, but I will say that Rey entering this cave in the first place shows she is not a Mary Sue. Remember, Rey wants to find her parents, and she wants them to be people who are special. Because if they are special, then so is she by default. Rey looking in other people for self-gratification is a flaw, and this scene is all about her trying to seek answers that will make her feel special. That is why when she doesn't get the answers she is looking for, she is upset. And what's the first thing she does afterwards? Goes to Kylo Ren for comfort and tells him that she's never felt so alone. For someone who has lived such an independent life, it's amazing that she is so emotionally dependent on others, and it makes perfect sense that she goes to Kylo here. He just told her how he felt abandoned by his parents. Rey strongly relates to this. She may not want to kill her parents the next time she sees them, but she understands that pain of feeling abandoned but still needing them. This is what causes Rey to begin to somewhat trust Ben. She knows what he is going through, so she thinks she can help him turn back to the light side. This is why she is open to touching his hand, because she understands him now. However, before they can continue talking any further, Luke interrupts and breaks their bond. Rey is annoyed that Luke didn't tell her the truth, and they get into a small fight. Now, the criticism of this fight is probably one of the worst criticisms of this movie. If you say that Rey beat Luke in this fight, then you are so disingenuous, it's crazy. Luke is literally toying with her. Let's just look how he fights her. He dodges her 3 times and then hits her. He's blocking all of her attacks, and then he straight up takes her staff and tosses it away. I don't think there's anything more disrespectful in weapon combat than effortlessly grabbing your opponent's weapon and tossing it away. Rey is easily outmatched here, and this scene shows it. She has to grab a lightsaber in order to make Luke listen to her, and it would be completely out of Luke's character to retaliate any further here. What would you want him to do? Punch Rey in the face and take the lightsaber from her? No! So this fight is another example of why Rey is not a Mary Sue. Mary Sue would easily outclass Luke in a fight and wouldn't need a lightsaber to end the confrontation. If Rey were a Mary Sue, she would be the one dodging all of his attacks, and she would be the one grabbing his weapon and tossing it away. So if you use this scene as an example of Rey being a Mary Sue, then you are easily just manipulating the movie to support your agenda, instead of taking what happened at face value. So after Luke tells Rey what really happens, she leaves to go confront Ben Solo. She believes that if she goes to him, then she can turn him back to the light side. So after changing her outfit, giving strange looks at the lightsaber, and putting on some mascara, she goes to see Kylo. I gotta give Rey credit, she's really making sure she looks her best when she's going to Kylo. He puts her in handcuffs and they go in the elevator, which is probably one of the sexiest scenes in Star Wars. Rey basically tells Kylo she knows he will turn good, and then Kylo is like, oh yeah, well I know your parents. And Rey's like, oh crap, and then he takes her to Snoke. Now this scene is a perfect example of people picking and choosing what they want to support their argument. Snoke tells Rey that she has fallen for a trap, and that he formed the bond between Rey and Kylo. So there is your first evidence of Rey not being a Mary Sue. She fell for a trap. Remember, Mary Sues are flawless and perfect and are overly competent. Snoke manages to freeze her and even lift her, something that Kylo couldn't do. It's implied that Snoke does the same mind probe that Kylo did in The Force Awakens, only this time it works and Rey gives up the location of Luke. This is definitely not something that would happen to a Mary Sue. For one, a Mary Sue would be powerful enough to prevent getting force frozen, and secondly, a Mary Sue would not give up the location of Luke. How could people call Rey a Mary Sue in The Force Awakens for resisting Kylo, but not mention anything here when she doesn't resist Snoke? Whatever. For the next few minutes, Snoke is literally just toying with Rey. He knocks her on the head with the lightsaber, forces her to watch the resistance getting blown up, and then simply swipes her to the floor when she tries to rush him. Now, how can anyone watch this scene and still say Rey is a Mary Sue? She's completely outmatched here and is honestly just embarrassing herself. This would never happen to the Mary Sue from the Star Trek story. Anyway, Snoke freezes Rey one more time and tells Kylo to kill her. However, Kylo subverted our expectations and killed his master, saving Rey. That's right, Rey needed saving from Kylo. A woman needed to be saved by a man. Rey was completely helpless until a man was able to save her. And people say Rian Johnson in this movie has an agenda. I don't think it needs to be elaborated on that Mary Sue would not be in a helpless situation where a man would have to save her. After Snoke is dead, the Dyad fights the Praetorian Guards. Now, of course, people use this scene to criticize Rey for being a Mary Sue. Now, a lot of the same things I said for the Starkiller base fight, I think apply here too. Rey is still decent at staff combat, but unlike The Force Awakens, this is not the first time she is wielding a lightsaber. Considering she is getting much stronger with the Force, and she has had some time to practice, she is definitely better with the lightsaber here than where she was in The Force Awakens. But there are two important aspects of this fight I think help explain why Rey was able to do well in this fight. One aspect of this fight is that Rey is fighting people who do not have the Force. A Force user fighting someone who doesn't have the Force has an extremely large advantage. Just like with flying, sword fighting is all about reflexes and predicting where your opponent's next move will be. Jedi have insane reflexes and can see things before they happen. Again, how do you think Jedi are able to block blaster shots? And considering that Rey has this huge advantage, it still takes her like a whole minute to take out this one dude at the end, while Kylo is fighting 3 guards at once. So yeah, a Force wielder fighting a non-Force wielder will always have a huge advantage. The other point that needs to be mentioned is the Dyad. It is explained in The Rise of Skywalker that when these two are together, their power increases greatly. And in this scene, Rey and Kylo are together, so their strength in the Force is going to be stronger than it would be if they were apart. So that's really all I have to say about this fight. I'm not going to comment on the absolutely ridiculous criticism of the choreography or the disappearing blade because I'm not here to defend every aspect of this movie nor refute every nitpick that people think is good criticism. If I were to do this, then maybe I would have to make a video that is closer to 10 hours. So after all the guards are dead, Rey and Kylo have their talk and join sides and talk about who Rey's parents are. Rey finds out that her parents are not only dead, but were nobody. This breaks her. Even worse, just like in the previous movie, Rey knew this. She was the one who told Kylo they were nobody. This shows how strongly in denial she was about this fact. This is a huge flaw for a character to have. So how could she be in denial about this? Imagine Luke in Return of the Jedi so strongly refusing to accept that Vader was his father that he doesn't even remotely acknowledge it. This is basically what Rey is going through, and at her mentally lowest point, she almost turns to the dark side. In The Rise of Skywalker, she tells Kylo that she really did want to take his hand. And hot take, but had Rey actually gone to the dark side here, I think this would have been 100 times more effective than Anakin's fall to the dark side. At this moment, Rey has every reason to join Kylo. Rey is searching for a place in the galaxy, and Kylo is the first person to really offer her a place. Not only that, but Kylo is the only one who understands what Rey is going through on a deep level, and it doesn't hurt that Rey saw him shirtless like an hour ago. But even with all that, Rey resists him and they fight over the lightsaber. Now, for those who say that Kylo should be able to pull the lightsaber to him because he is stronger than Rey, don't understand the Dyad. In The Rise of Skywalker, it is said that they are two people who are one in the Force. That means that when they are together, they are essentially one being in the Force. So it would make sense that they are both the same when it comes to strength level in the Force. This is why the lightsaber never moves closer to one of them until it literally breaks. When they are together, they share the same power. No matter how strong they are, no one is going to win this tug of war. So after the lightsaber breaks, Rey leaves and proceeds to help out with the Battle of Crate. Now before I continue, something needs to be emphasized. Rey failed. Rey had 2 major goals in this movie and she failed at both. Goal 1 was to bring Luke back to the Resistance. She failed at that because it was Yoda who convinced Luke to go back and help, not Rey. And then her second goal was to bring Kylo back to the light side, which she obviously failed at. How can people say Rey never fails when she literally fails at the only two goals she had in this entire movie? So yeah, Rey fails, which is not something a Mary Sue does. The next time we see Rey is when she's in the Falcon shooting down TIE fighters. And this is actually one aspect of this scene I really don't like. In this scene, Rey manages to shoot down like 10 TIE fighters rather easily, like she's having fun. However, in the previous movie, there's a whole scene devoted to how hard it was for Finn to destroy 2 TIE fighters. Now, you could explain this away if you really wanted to. You could say that since there are more TIEs, the odds you hit one are greater. You could say that since Rey has the Force, she is naturally better at shooting, but I don't like to use the Force as an explanation for everything. It's one thing for her to be an already established melee weapon fighter and to have the Force enhance those abilities, but it's more than likely that she never used a turret before and she manages to get a triple collateral here.
Oh baby, a triple! Oh yeah!
So I don't really like this aspect of Rey's skill set, but it doesn't really bother me that much. It's the only time she's ever even in the gunner seat of the Falcon anyway, so I can forgive it. So far, this and Rey being able to speak to Wookiees are the only 2 skills that Rey has that I feel are a little absurd. Towards the end of the battle, Rey manages to find out where the Resistance is trying to escape and lifts a bunch of rocks so they can leave the base. Now, just like every time Rey uses the Force, she gets called a Mary Sue here. So Rey lifts a bunch of rocks and people instantly look back at Luke struggling to lift an X-Wing, and thus Rey is a Mary Sue. Just as I said earlier, Luke and Rey are very different. Luke struggled using the Force because he didn't believe in himself. He saw the X-Wing as being too large and therefore deep down felt he couldn't lift it, which is why he wasn't able to. Rey doesn't have that problem. All of her flaws relate to her parents and her place in the galaxy. She's confident in her ability to use the Force. And for those of you who say that what Rey lifted was too much, do you not remember when Yoda said size matters not?
Size matters not. Look at me. Judge me by my size, do you?
Now this doesn't mean that Rey could have moved a moon if she believed she could, but the size of something does not matter as much as most people think it does. It's about believing in yourself, which is what Rey does. So given that this is my interpretation of the Force, I don't see it as being ridiculous. And for the rest of the movie, Rey doesn't do anything else that warrants her being called a Mary Sue. She has one more Force bond with Kylo, has a brief conversation with Leia, and the movie ends, and we are done with The Last Jedi. Now, as I said before, The Last Jedi is the film where Rey appears the least. However, it is the last movie where Rey has her most screen time by far, which is actually the most amount of screen time a character has had in any Star Wars movie, even beating Han Solo in the movie titled after him. So there is no point in wasting your time any further. Let's start looking at the rise of Skywalker. Now, in reality, I should just be able to excuse everything that Rey does in this movie by saying she's been training for a year. This is what people complained about constantly after The Last Jedi came out, that Rey didn't get any proper training from Luke, which makes everything she proceeds to do impossible. However, this point is incredibly hypocritical. If you look at Luke at the end of The Empire Strikes Back and at the beginning of Return of the Jedi, he is a completely different person in terms of his skill set. He is a far more accomplished Jedi in Return of the Jedi, but how did he get so much stronger? He definitely trained, but how? He has no master that could have trained him because it's heavily implied that between the 2 movies he didn't go back to Yoda. To the best of our knowledge, he didn't have any Jedi texts or anyone of any Force knowledge to teach him, so how did he get so much stronger? Well, people don't hold Luke to the same standard as Rey, so it doesn't matter. But Rey has the Jedi texts and someone who may not be a Jedi Master, but who had significant Force training to help her out. Why is Rey a Mary Sue in this movie when Luke is not one in his movie? Well, because of the double standard. Yeah, there are 3 years between episodes 4 and 5, but it's not like Luke's training increased during this time really. And even if the time difference did matter, there is no indication of exactly how much time passed in any of the Star Wars films besides Attack of the Clones. So if they decided to make The Rise of Skywalker take place 3 years after The Last Jedi, they could easily do that because there is no way we would know based off the movie. Now, as I said earlier, I could just use Rey training for a year to explain everything, but I will cover this movie the same way I covered the previous two. So let's begin. Rey's first scene in this movie is of her training, and the first thing she does in this scene is try to contact the voices of the Jedi before her, which she fails at. That's right, the first thing Rey does in this movie is fail at something. Rey fails a lot in this movie, but this is just the first thing. So after failing to contact the Jedi, she goes to Leia and tells her she will run the training course. She does some acrobatics that are nearly impossible for any regular person, but one thing that's really interesting here is that we get a hint towards Rey's darker side. She gets very frustrated and angry when trying to destroy the training ball. This is not how a Jedi should properly train. You know the Jedi code, the one that reads, "There is no emotion, there is peace, there is no ignorance, there is knowledge, there is no passion, there is serenity, there is no chaos, there is harmony, there is no death, there is the Force." Yeah, Rey represents none of this. She gets really angry really quick in this movie, which is another big flaw that she has, but it doesn't come close to her biggest flaw, which will be addressed shortly. So because Rey got too angry and emotional during the training, she ended up accidentally hurting BB-8. Again, this is something a Mary Sue would never do. Rey is literally putting her friends in harm's way, and that is not what a competent Jedi would do. And remember, competence is a big aspect of what a Mary Sue is. Rey's job is to protect the Resistance, and here she fails at that. Moving on, she fails at completing the training course and tells Leia that she is not feeling like herself and that she's tired. And Mary Sue would not fail at completing a training course and most certainly wouldn't get distracted or tired from training. And then comes the first thing that Rey does, which represents her biggest flaw in this film. Rey hands Leia the lightsaber and tells her that she is not worthy of wielding the Skywalker lightsaber. This is Rey's flaw in this movie. She has no faith in herself that she can be the hope the galaxy needs. This ties directly into Rey being someone who is very insecure. In the first two films, she was insecure about her parents, and now she's insecure about herself. Some people who love the first two sequel films and hate The Rise of Skywalker look at this moment as a regression for her character, which I completely disagree with. Let's look at everything from Rey's perspective. At the end of The Force Awakens, she was tasked with bringing Luke Skywalker back so he can be the savior of the galaxy. However, Rey fails at this, so she goes to plan B, which is to try and bring Ben back to the light side. This also fails, so now she is thrusted into this role by default. She failed at bringing back that hope for the Resistance, she sees herself as nothing but a nobody scavenger, she can't contact the ghosts of the Jedi, she is struggling to complete her training course, she has trouble controlling her negative emotions, and she is injuring her friends because of her emotions. Why on earth would she feel worthy of taking on the Skywalker lightsaber? So I don't see this as a regression of her character at all. And to those who say Rey has no flaws, clearly don't see how troubled and insecure Rey is at the beginning of this movie. The next thing we see her do is reading the Jedi texts from the end of The Last Jedi. This is important because it helps explain some of the things we see her do later on. Meanwhile, Poe and Finn come back with the message about Palpatine, and they get into a small argument because Rey hasn't been helping out with Resistance missions. And Mary Sue definitely wouldn't sit back and let everyone else do the work, just saying. So there is a Resistance-wide meeting about the return of Palpatine, and when Rey hears them mention Exegol, she remembers what she read in the Jedi texts and tells Leia she knows how to find the Wayfinder. Leia tells her that she shouldn't go, Rey disagrees, and then her and the crew prepare to leave for Pisana. Beforehand, however, when Rey says bye to Leia for the last time, Leia tells her to never be afraid of who she is. Now, a lot of people point to this line as evidence that she should have kept the name Palpatine. Now, this is up to personal preference, but I disagree with this. I don't think Leia meant this in a way for Rey to embrace her being a Palpatine. I think it was more so her telling Rey that it doesn't matter who your grandfather is, which is also the theme of this movie. This really doesn't have to do with her being a Mary Sue, but it is a point I wanted to address because it does tie into her flaws. Right before they leave, there is this one small moment where Rey is staring out into the fields. To me, I saw this as her being grateful that she can experience so much green because she did grow up in a desert, and when she first arrived on Takodana, she did mention how she didn't know there was that much green in the whole galaxy. It's a small moment that I really like because as someone who values gratitude tremendously, I respect people who are generally just grateful people. They leave Ajan Kloss and the crew arrives on Pisana. When they first enter the large festival, Rey seems to be amazed by this. There are two specific moments that give us a look into Rey's character here. The first is when she sees a bunch of kids sitting around laughing at some sort of show that is going on. I think Rey envies these kids. Rey didn't have a childhood of happiness and joy, so seeing these kids so happy reminds her of her life on Jakku and how miserable she was. It just shows to me how even though she may have come to terms with her parents being no one, it still haunts her even a year after The Last Jedi. Next, some local comes up and gives Rey a necklace and proceeds to ask Rey what her family name is. This is a very important moment for Rey because it ties into her decision at the end to take the name Skywalker. I'm going to talk about this more when I'm done discussing the Rise of Skywalker because I feel it's more appropriate to discuss it at the end of the movie. But what I do want to say here is why this upsets Rey. The thing Rey wants the most in these movies is belonging. In The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, she felt that belonging was with her parents, so not having a family name reminds her that she never had that relationship with her parents that she wishes she had. This was at least my take on this scene. Again, this is just the story expanding on Rey's flaws, which as I stated numerous times throughout this video, are fairly big flaws. Afterwards, we get the first Force bond scene between Rey and Kylo. Nothing much is really accomplished during this scene, but what the characters say says a lot about their bond. Remember how earlier when I first started talking about their bond, I mentioned how it allows them to deeply know each other? This scene is an example of that. Both Rey and Kylo are just taking jabs at each other's biggest weaknesses. Rey mentioned how Kylo is haunted by killing his father, and Kylo asks Rey if she still counts the days since her parents left, and how there is so much pain and anger within her. Now, even though Rey does nothing here, Rey in this scene does not represent what a proper Mary Sue would do. Kylo is trying to get under her skin and distract her so we can find a clue to her whereabouts. By talking about her parents, this distracts Rey and she allows Kylo to get close enough to where he can steal the necklace from her. Rey allowed herself to be manipulated and now the location of her and her friends is revealed and their mission is at stake. And Mary Sue would not be so clumsy when talking to an enemy, and would definitely make sure no clues of her whereabouts were revealed. So this is just another example of Rey making mistakes and putting her friends in danger in this movie. Afterwards, she notifies her friends that Kylo knows where they are and the First Order arrives. Then there's the Pisana spear chase where Rey doesn't really do much. I mean, all she does is shoot a blaster at some stormtroopers, and considering she's been with the Resistance for like a year now, I would hope she has had some target practice with that thing. When the fight ends, she notices that she has seen Ochi's ship before, and they manage to sink into some cave. Inside the cave, Rey finds the Sith dagger, and Rey notes how horrible things have happened with this. You'd think that if she could sense horrible things that happened with the dagger, that she would have sensed all the younglings that the Skywalker saber killed, but that's just a funny nitpick. Now the snake shows up and we get the first scene where Rey uses her Force healing. Now just like almost everything she does, people scream Mary Sue at this, so let's take a look. There are a few questions that Rey using this ability raises. First, how did she learn how to do this? Now, I really don't think it takes that much thinking to put two and two together that she learned it from the texts. Those texts and Leia are the only things she has to learn about the Force, so it makes perfect sense that she had learned that from the texts. And the other big question is that if Rey can use Force healing, then why didn't the Jedi of the past use it? And I could think of so many different answers for this. One possible answer could be that not every Jedi can use every ability. I know this is true when you're just looking at the canon, but even if we were to just look at the films, you would ask yourself why couldn't some of the other Jedi use the same skills that Yoda had? Another possible answer could be that maybe the other Jedi just didn't know this ability existed. The Jedi of the prequels were very strict in what they were taught, so maybe they never learned this ability, and only Luke discovered it after Return of the Jedi when he found some of the Jedi texts. The sequels do have a lot of new Force powers that we haven't seen before, so maybe the same could be said about those powers as well. And my last possible answer would be that maybe the Jedi didn't want to teach this power to other Jedi. The Jedi never saw death as something that should be avoided, that it was a natural part of life and should be embraced. I could see them not liking this power because in a sense you are cheating death when you use it. So that is another valid explanation that makes sense to me. See what happens when you put an ounce of thought and imagination into a fantasy story? When something isn't explained that involves the magic system, ask yourself, is there a reasonable explanation that I can infer? Now this isn't and shouldn't be the case for everything, but I think it applies here. Also, those who don't criticize Baby Yoda for also being able to use it are just showing how much of a double standard they have for Rey. Baby Yoda is a baby who to the best of our knowledge has had no Jedi training, cause he's a baby. He not only uses the same power as Rey, but the other Force abilities as well. Why on earth is Baby Yoda not called a Mary Sue or a Gary Stu? I've heard some people say that those of Yoda's species are naturally stronger with the Force, so this would make more sense. For one, there is nowhere in the canon that this is stated, so you cannot say it as a fact, it's just a theory. And even if that were true, it still goes against all the training complaints that people address towards Rey. If Baby Yoda and Yoda are just naturally good at the Force without training, then that would ruin the Force the same way that Rey supposedly ruined it. And why can't I make the same argument for Rey? She's the granddaughter of the most powerful Sith in the canon, so why can't she just be as powerful? This Baby Yoda example just shows how much of a double standard there is for Rey, and it is so frustrating. But anyway, that is my take on Rey using the Force healing. Afterwards, they escape the cave and head towards Ochi's ship, and again, Rey decides to make decisions that put everyone else in harm's way. She senses that Kylo Ren is coming, so she gives Finn her staff and goes off into the middle of the desert. I really don't understand why Rey would do this. It's actually a pretty stupid thing to do. You know you're getting followed by the First Order. The galaxy is depending on you to find Exegol. You know your friends are not going to leave without you, so you're just putting everyone at risk. And you know what ends up happening? Chewie gets captured because Rey decided to go confront Kylo. This was really stupid on Rey's part, and again, she's letting her emotions take over rather than the logical thing to do. A Mary Sue definitely wouldn't do something stupid like this that would put all her friends in danger. So Kylo comes and she chops up the TIE and he crashes. And just as I said earlier, Chewie gets captured and he is in one of the transports. Now we are at the transport tug of war between Rey and Kylo. Rey is really strong with the Force now. She's had like a year of training and she's with her dyad partner, which means that her and Ben's power is even stronger. So do I think that it's unrealistic that she can hold the transport like that? If she were by herself, then maybe, but since she's with Kylo Ren and her power is much stronger, I think it's perfectly reasonable. Remember, this is a power that hasn't been seen in generations, so it's going to be really strong, which is why for the most part, the two are in an even tug of war. Now towards the end, Kylo starts to get the upper hand, and I see this as Rey mentally losing control. She sees that she's getting beat by Kylo, and this infuriates her, which inevitably leads her to shooting lightning at the transport and blowing it up. Rey basically let her friend die here because she decided to make decisions that put everyone at risk, and she let her emotions get the better of her. Again, this is 100% something a Mary Sue would not do, but I do need to address her using the lightning in the first place. Now this is a little tricky because I always had the assumption that this was only for Sith to use, but it makes sense that if someone did want to tap deep into their anger and their hatred, that they would accidentally use a dark side power, and considering Rey has all the raw power in the world thanks to her dyad, I can see this making sense given the lore so far. However, I would understand if people really don't like this, so I'm not going to say it's a stupid complaint here, but I do think it is reasonable. After she destroys the transport, she is in shock and her and the crew leave, basically proving my point that Rey confronting Kylo in the first place was stupid and couldn't have led to any good. Rey is in shock and she tells Finn that she had visions of her and Kylo on the Sith throne. This is very important because it helps the audience understand why Rey runs off to Ahch-To later. So after she talks to Finn, the crew regroups and decides to go to Kijimi. On Kijimi, Rey doesn't really have much to do. She just kicks some ass with her staff, but that's not much different than what she did in The Force Awakens, so I don't really have anything to say. Obviously, she's much more skilled at it, but she's had a year of lightsaber training, so I think it makes sense that she is much better than where she was before. They wipe 3PO's mind and manage to get the location of the Wayfinder. However, there's something that Rey says here that really hits me hard. She asks 3PO what are the odds of them succeeding if they don't wipe his mind. This is the first time I believe anyone has asked the odds from 3PO, and it just shows how compassionate Rey is. This is why I think her using Force healing is a natural extension of Rey's personality, just a connection I wanted to emphasize. After they retrieved the info they needed on Kijimi, they head to the Star Destroyer to go rescue Chewbacca. Just a small thing, but I really wish when they were running around that Rey used her lightsaber. We never see Rey take out peasants with her lightsaber like we do with Luke and Anakin in their trilogies. Actually, the only people in the whole trilogy that she manages to kill with the lightsaber are the Praetorian guards. She deflects the blaster shots of Palpatine's guards at the end, but she doesn't actively stab any of them with the lightsaber. Anyway, they continue moving into the hall and they run into 2 stormtroopers. I don't know why they simply just didn't kill them, but Rey decides to spare their lives and use a Jedi mind trick on them. If you had a problem with it in The Force Awakens, then you may forgive it here considering she's had much more training since then, more so than Luke had before Return of the Jedi. So I don't see how you could argue that this is an example of her being a Mary Sue, especially when compared to Luke in Return of the Jedi. So the crew proceeds to split up. Rey goes and looks for the dagger, and Finn and Poe go look for Chewie. Now there is something here that actually quite annoys me. Rey says she needs to find the dagger, and when Poe asks her why do they need the dagger, she just says she has a feeling. This is completely unnecessary. During 3PO's monologue on Kijimi, where he reveals the location of the Wayfinder, he straight up says on the southern shore, only this blade tells. Why couldn't Rey just say 3PO mentioned how only this blade tells, so that means we need the blade to find the dagger? I bring this up because I'm not a fan of when they say a feeling when a character needs to know information. I think it's a bit of a cop-out to just use the Force to explain this. This change would have made much more sense and made Rey seem less overpowered in my opinion. But regardless, she manages to find her way into Kylo's bedroom where she finds the dagger, and this scene is actually pretty important. When she picks up the dagger, she hears the voices of her younger self and her parents. It scares her temporarily, and then the bond forms and Kylo shows up. Kylo tells her that he needed to push her in the desert so he can confirm to himself that she is a Palpatine. He tells her that he knows the rest of her story, and this really gets to Rey. It's been about a year since the events of The Last Jedi, and Rey probably had some time to come to terms with the realization that her parents are no one and are dead. However, when Kylo tells her that he knows the rest of her story, it opens up a can of worms that Rey doesn't want opened.
To keep you safe. You remember more than you say.
This is like if you had a traumatic experience in your life and you had time to cope with what happened, but then a few years later new information is revealed that changes everything. It's not a pleasant experience because it would remind you of the pain of that traumatic experience. This is what Rey is going through during this scene. Kylo starts to tell her that her parents chose to be no one because they wanted to keep her safe. Imagine the guilt that Rey must feel here. She probably hated her parents for the past year for selling her, but now she finds out that they were actually trying to protect her. I'm not sure about you, but I would feel really guilty too. This reminds me of the scene in Rogue One where Jyn listens to the message of her father. She never wanted to hear from her father again, so when she finds out that he did all of this to save the galaxy, it breaks her. And this scene breaks Rey too. I feel really bad for Rey here, and I think Daisy really does a great job acting in this scene. Rey doesn't want to feel this pain again, but Kylo is giving her no choice. When she says, "I don't want this," I really felt that.
I've been in your head.
I don't want this!
Search your memories.
It also shows how Rey is still really insecure about her relationship with her parents, that the mere conversation about her parents is really cutting her to her core. Also, Rey basically lashes out at Kylo with lots of anger. Nothing that Rey has done when Kylo showed up resembles anything what a Mary Sue would do. Mary Sue would not still be haunted by her past, and most certainly wouldn't attack out of pure rage and anger. After they start to fight for a bit, Rey starts to remember her last moments with her parents and how they loved her. This is huge for Rey because this changes everything for her. I don't blame her for being so upset. Kylo continues to tell her how Palpatine gave the order to kill her parents. And yet again, Rey manages to give up her position to Kylo and put their whole mission at stake. Granted, Kylo should have probably already been notified considering they did just light up the hangar a few minutes ago, but anyway, after handing 3PO the dagger and Chewie's bandolier, she goes to confront Kylo about why Palpatine wanted to kill her. And this is where we and Rey learn that she is the granddaughter of Emperor Palpatine. Now there's two ways you can look at this. The first way is that this was an attempt by J.J. Abrams to simply retcon The Last Jedi because he hates it. Or you can see from a story perspective why J.J. would want to do this. Everything that happens to Rey up until the point where she talks to Luke on Ahch-To is trying to show why Rey shouldn't be worthy of continuing on the Jedi legacy. She's wildly insecure, she cannot control her emotions, she has a very strong dark side, she constantly makes decisions that put her friends in danger, and now she's related to the man who's responsible for the death of thousands of Jedi. Everything besides her relation to Palpatine is behavioral, so it's something that can change over time, but her relationship to Palpatine is permanent. No matter what she does, she will always be his granddaughter. This was the worst thing Rey could have possibly heard. Her relation to Palpatine plays perfectly into her insecurities about her being the heir to the Jedi. If Rey was a true Mary Sue, then this wouldn't bother her. Mary Sues are competent women. A competent woman in this case would brush this news off like it was nothing and know that she's already worthy of being a Jedi. Rey is insecure about like a dozen different things right now, so there is no possible way that she could be a Mary Sue. And by the way, her talking to Kylo here again is putting her friends in danger. She knows her friends won't leave without her, so that means they have to pull off some crazy maneuver to save her, which is what ends up happening. Oh, and this is another example of a group of men having to save Rey, even though Star Wars fans would have you think Rey is fully capable of saving herself. After Finn helps Rey escape, they are on the Falcon making some repairs, and Rey gives a little speech that is exactly like something a Sith would say. She mentions how she's going to find Palpatine and destroy him. Finn's like, girl, this is not you, which triggers Rey because she feels that nobody really knows who she is. They arrive on one of the Endor moons and they find the Death Star. Now this next part gets a lot of crap, but I think it's completely unwarranted. Rey takes out the dagger and pulls something out of the hilt that helps her find the location of the Wayfinder. People like to point out that it's stupid that she knew how to do this and that she happened to be in the exact spot in order for this to work. For one, you don't need to be exactly where Rey is, just somewhere in the general vicinity in order for the map on the dagger to work. And secondly, 3PO literally told them that on the southern shore only this blade tells. That literally means that this blade will tell you where to go if you are on the southern shore. It's okay to think that this is a little goofy, but to say that it was completely lucky that Rey was able to be in the right spot is just simply not true. So Rey didn't have any Mary Sue luck here, she knew where to go because that is where 3PO told her to go. Jannah and some of the locals show up shortly after and tell them that the tides are too strong and that they need to wait until the morning. Rey is annoyed because she knows that they can't wait that long, so she decides to take off on her own on one of the water skimmers. Now this I'm actually not a big fan of either. Rey swimming is one thing I can mentally find a valid reason for how she could do, but to pilot one of these skimmers I think is a bit too much. It doesn't seem like it's the same as just flying any regular ship, so I think it's a bit unrealistic, especially given how strong the tides are. So this, along with Rey understanding Wookiees and shooting down all those ties on Crate so quickly, are skills that Rey has that I would agree are unrealistic. Anyway, she manages to make her way to the Death Star and begins to climb her way up. This was a neat callback to her first scene in The Force Awakens, so I quite enjoyed this. It's nice seeing things come full circle. And by the way, this climb is insanely difficult. I would bet large sums of money that not a single person watching this video would be able to make that climb with no harness, so I'm gonna give some props to Rey here for being a badass. And if you think that this makes her a Mary Sue, it's literally a callback to her first time on Jakku scavenging. When she gets to the top, she finds her way to the throne room. Small tangent, but I love the music that plays here. It's the same theme as Darth Vader's death. Again, it's a small thing, but I love the way this music was implemented. So Rey finds her way to the little room where the Wayfinder is, and she has an encounter with the dark version of herself. Dark Rey tells the real Rey to never be afraid of who she is, which is a play on the line that Leia gave earlier in the movie. After a lightsaber exchange, Rey stumbles out of the room, drops the Wayfinder, and Kylo picks it up. And Kylo starts to straight up expose Rey on the spot. Rey is completely unraveling emotionally. Kylo even points this out when he says, "Look at yourself." Kylo makes one last plea to Rey to turn to the dark side, and after she rejects, he destroys the Wayfinder. This infuriates Rey and she starts to unleash all her anger. She starts swinging around with Kylo, easily avoiding her. He takes out his lightsaber and the duel begins. I want everyone to look at the smaller details with this fight. Rey is the one who is completely out of control emotionally, and Kylo Ren is really calm this whole fight. It's a neat twist because usually it's the Sith that's angry and the Jedi that's calm. However, since Rey is way too emotional right now, it's going to end up draining her out. But let's look at the dynamics of this fight compared to The Force Awakens. Unlike that fight, Kylo Ren here is not emotionally compromised. He is 100% healthy and in peak Kylo Ren form. And I think it's safe to say that Rey is also significantly better here. She's been training for a year now, and she's just overall stronger with the Force. And with Rey being significantly stronger, she still manages to basically lose this fight. This shows that when Kylo Ren is not emotionally damaged, he can easily kick Rey's ass. I was so happy when I saw this in the theater because it validated everything I said about Rey and Kylo in The Force Awakens. Kylo lost that fight because he had just killed his father and it made him weaker. Had that not happened, the fight would have been over much sooner and Kylo would have won. So after fighting for a few minutes, Rey gets really tired and Kylo just unleashes on her. This would not happen to a Mary Sue. Mary Sues do not get tired during fights, and most importantly wouldn't lose a fight either. So Rey basically losing this fight is another great example of how it's impossible for Rey to be a Mary Sue. However, right before Rey would have been possibly killed, Leia reaches out to her son one last time. Now, to those who say Rey is a Mary Sue because Leia sacrificed her life to save Rey, you have completely misunderstood this scene. I genuinely believe that Leia didn't think of Rey one bit during this scene, and all she wanted to do was reach out to her son. She might not have said anything, but I always got the impression that he felt she still loved him, regardless of what he did to Han. And while Ben was distracted by the death of his mother, Rey was able to take his lightsaber and stab him through the chest. Rey then feels Leia's death as well. Filled with guilt, she decides to heal Kylo. She proceeds to tell him that she did want to take his hand, but Ben's hand. She then proceeds to take his TIE fighter and leave the planet. And this was the last straw for Rey. I don't think Rey went into this fight with the intention of wanting to kill Kylo, but she almost did that anyway. At this point, she can't trust herself, and honestly, I wouldn't trust myself either. She is constantly putting her friends in danger, she's killing people she doesn't want to kill, she can't control her emotions, she's really starting to give into the dark side, and she's the granddaughter of the man who's about to take over the galaxy. I know I've said this like 100 times by now, but I'm not going to stop. Someone as insecure as Rey cannot possibly be a Mary Sue. All of the things I just mentioned are not something that would happen to a Mary Sue, and a Mary Sue definitely wouldn't run away from everything and attempt to exile herself just because she feels she cannot control her power. Like, after watching this scene, how could you possibly think Rey is still a Mary Sue? She is literally running away because she is scared. I wish this was enough to end this debate, but we still got a whole third act of this movie to cover. So she arrives on Ook 2, the same island Luke was on in The Last Jedi and the same island he was in exile all those years, and begins to destroy the TIE fighter. The TIE is on fire and she is chucking logs into it. The goal here is to destroy her only means of transportation, so she cannot leave the island, stuck in isolation like Luke was. She takes one last look at the Skywalker saber, the thing she never felt worthy enough to wield, and chucks it into the fire as well. However, the ghost of Luke Skywalker is there to catch it. Rey's like, OMG, it's Master Skywalker, and Luke is like, what the hell are you doing? She explains to Luke that she saw herself on the throne of the Sith, and she won't let it happen, and that she's gonna do what he did and stay on this island. Luke responds by telling her he was wrong, that it was fear that kept him on this island, which is the same reason Rey is on the island, except it is fear of herself. For the 1000th time, a Mary Sue would never be afraid of herself, especially to the point where she would want to go into exile. Luke proceeds to tell her that he and Leia both knew she was a Palpatine, which is a little weird, but regardless, he tells her that Leia decided to train her because she knew deep down Rey was a good person that wouldn't be defined by her bloodline. This is what Rey needed to hear, the trust and confidence of someone else that she is still worthy to become a Jedi. After hearing the story of Leia's Jedi training, Luke gives her Leia's lightsaber and she's ready to leave. She takes the other Wayfinder that wasn't destroyed out of Kylo Ren's ship, and Luke lifts his X-Wing for her so she can leave the island and head to Exegol. So she arrives on Exegol and lands the X-Wing. Now if you want to critique her for still being able to fly here, it's not like she's in some sort of combat right now, she's literally just flying in open space and then lands unchallenged. So even if you did have a problem with her being able to fly in The Force Awakens, this is something completely different. Anyway, after she lands, she enters Palpatine's headquarters and wanders around before finding the Sith throne. This part was always kind of funny to me. She looks around at the throne, Palpatine isn't there, turns around to see that there's a large crowd, and then Palpatine is right next to the throne. Was he like being held above the throne like 100 feet and told people to lower him when Rey wasn't looking? It's not really even a nitpick, but it's just something that always made me chuckle a little bit. Rey meets Palpatine for the first time, and he's like, "Empress Palpatine, I want you to take the throne, and all you have to do is kill me." She gives the standard Jedi speech on how she won't hate him and how she's a Jedi, and Palpatine's like, "Okay, then I'm gonna go kill all of your friends up in the sky." He manipulates her more by telling her that all of them are going to die because she led them here, which is playing into her fear and anger, which is what he wants. And if Rey wasn't already flawed enough, she literally agrees to Palpatine's plan. In what world would a Mary Sue agree to a plan made by her enemy that would result in her utter defeat? She takes out the lightsaber and is ready to strike down Palpatine. However, right before she does, she has one last force bond with Ben. Now that she knows he is on the light side, she hands him one of the lightsabers, and together they face off the Knights of Ren and the guards and then face Palpatine together. Now would you look at that? Again, for like the 4th or 5th time in this movie, Rey needed to be saved by Ben Solo. She was going to doom the galaxy if it wasn't for Ben Solo. So again, another example of how Rey is not a Mary Sue. Now at this point, you either still think Rey shouldn't be able to defend herself at all, or you understand why she is so powerful. There is nothing I could say about this fight that is any different than literally any other fight that she has been in up to this point. So after all the guards are dead, Palpatine decided to force drain them both because the power of the dyad is ridiculously strong, and it is able to heal Palpatine into his usual self. I don't think a Mary Sue would be easily force drained like this, because they are usually so competent, so a real Mary Sue would probably find a way out of this. Anyway, Palpatine tosses Ben Solo off a cliff and begins to base boost lightning into the sky. Just like she has felt her whole life, Rey is alone and defeated, having most of her life force drained. Her last attempt is to call on the voices of the Jedi to be with her, and unlike the beginning of the movie, they respond. I want to give my take on why the voices were enough for Rey and why we didn't need to see physical ghosts appear. This whole trilogy, Rey has felt alone. She has been searching for belonging for 3 movies, and to the best of her knowledge, the person that knows her the best is currently dead. Rey probably still doesn't feel worthy of being a Jedi, but when the Jedi tell her that she will never be alone and that they will always be with her, that's the one thing she needed to hear this whole trilogy, that she will never be alone. With some newfound strength, she rises and takes one last stand against Palpatine. He starts shooting lightning at her, and in a defensive manner rejects it and lets Palpatine destroy himself, ending the Sith in the process. However, this took literally every ounce that Rey has, which causes her to die. Rey literally dies. Now, the original Mary Sue also died, but that was in the form of an illness. Here, Rey essentially was killed by her enemy. A real Mary Sue would only die by something 100% out of her control. This is not the case for Rey. So with Rey dead, Ben manages to crawl out of the pit he was thrown down and finds her laying there lifeless. He then makes the decision to sacrifice his life so she can live. So for the 2nd time in like 10 minutes and maybe the 6th time in the whole movie, Rey needed to be saved by someone else. Only this time she literally needed to be resurrected. Also, I never saw what Ben did here as the same thing as the force healing that Rey did earlier. I thought this was something that was exclusive to them because they were a dyad. I don't think either one of them could have just sacrificed their whole life to someone else. I could be wrong, but that was just my interpretation of these events. So after waking up and kissing Ben Solo, he dies and the war is now over. Rey leaves, goes back to Ajan Kloss, and gives her newfound family a big hug. Rey has finally accepted that the belonging she has been looking for was with the Resistance, which is what Maz told her all the way back in The Force Awakens. However, before the credits roll, Rey decides to take a trip to Tatooine to bury Luke and Leia's lightsabers. Now, you could argue all you want about whether or not it makes sense for Rey to go to Tatooine, but I'm not here to make that argument. This video is about Rey, not every flaw in this movie. So Rey buries the lightsabers and an old woman shows up. She asks who Rey is. Rey responds with just Rey. The old woman says Rey who, and Rey responds with Rey Skywalker. Now it is time to address Rey Skywalker. For one, if you genuinely believe this is identity theft, then you are an idiot. Theft implies that she stole something. However, it is heavily implied that both Luke and Leia gave her permission to take the name. If you disagree with this because the ghosts didn't straight up say the name is yours, then you are just being annoying and you don't understand film. Now, the more reasonable question is, why did she take the name Skywalker? Some people felt she should have taken one of many different names, so I will address most of them. Rey Palpatine. The argument here is that Rey was told to never be afraid of who she was, so embracing the name Palpatine would bring everything full circle. I don't like this idea because embracing her bloodline is not what Rey's story was about. Rey wanted to find a family and one that loved her. Her parents may have loved her, but she didn't even know if they went by that name, which they probably didn't. Rey wants to be part of a family that will always love her and be there for her, and Chief Palpatine is not that family. Rey Organa. Rey was really only closest to Leia, so it would make the most sense that she takes this name. However, since Leia is the only Organa that she knows, and since Leia is both an Organa and a Skywalker, she might as well take the name of the family that she knew 4 people of. Also, I really don't think Leia would care about this. You think Leia would be upset that Rey didn't take the name Organa? Hell no. Leia would just want Rey to be happy, and if Rey taking the name Skywalker makes her happy, then it will also make Leia happy. The last name I will address is just Rey. This is a really popular answer, but it's also the worst possible solution for her in my opinion. I know that many people prefer that Rey stayed a nobody and never became a Palpatine, and I agree with these people. However, regardless of what you would have liked for her, the character herself did not want to be a nobody. Rey's journey is not about taking pride in being part of no family. She wants a family. Taking a family name is everything she ever wanted, so not taking one I think would have been out of character. So this is why I feel taking the name Skywalker works best, because it honors the 4 people that made a huge difference in her life, and those 4 people will always love her from the afterlife. I also would think it would be really neat if stories set after the rise of Skywalker had characters who felt alone in the universe adopt the name Skywalker. Anakin was a slave and Luke was a farmer, but they both grew up to become really important people who made decisions that saved the galaxy, even if one of them was a mass murderer. For kids who feel alone or irrelevant in the universe, taking the name Skywalker can be a small way for them to feel like they belong somewhere and that they are not alone. It's a small wish, but I think it is one that would really benefit the canon. But anyway, Rey takes the name Skywalker, stares off into the sunset, and the movie ends, concluding the Star Wars sequel trilogy. Now, as I said earlier on in the video, I do want to devote a section to this video talking about the external material. Just a reminder, this portion of this video is not meant as a defense for the films. Films stand on their own, and external material should not be used to better understand a film. This section is meant for those who care about the canon. Just because I love these films doesn't mean I can't separate them from the overarching story of the Star Wars canon. So if you're someone who cares about the books and comics, then this section is for you. I will also be discussing information that is in reference guides, which do contain a lot about Rey's past. Now, I'm not going to cite every piece of information that is used in this section, but most of this info can be found on Wikipedia, so if you're really curious where I got a nugget of information, you can look it up there or leave a question in the comments and I will hopefully answer it for you. Also, pretty much everything here is going to discuss things from her life prior to The Force Awakens and during The Force Awakens. There isn't as much in the other 2 films because I feel a lot of those complaints can be traced back to things she learned early on in her life. So let's begin with Rey's early life. So Rey was born in 15 ABY, which means during the events of The Force Awakens, she is 19 years old. Just a refresher for those who may not know, The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi both take place in the year 34 ABY, and The Rise of Skywalker takes place in 35 ABY. ABY stands for After the Battle of Yavin, which is the events of Episode 4 A New Hope. So in order for Rey to survive, Rey became a scavenger in the employ of Unkar Plutt and participated in many missions to help scavenge for him. When she was young, she would loot the crashed New Republic and Empire vessels from the Battle of Jakku. She heard many stories about the battle and how it was the last stand during the Galactic Civil War. So from a very young age, she spent a lot of time going through these vessels, which is why she is so good at climbing things in The Force Awakens and The Rise of Skywalker. Rey over the years became one of Ankar Plutt's best scavengers. However, regardless of this, he always viewed her as property rather than an employee. She inevitably became well known for her abilities with the quarterstaff, as she was actually so skilled with the staff that other locals on Jakku were afraid of her and never attempted to cross her. After taking residence in one of the crashed AT-ATs, she gathered some parts and built her own speeder. So the speeder we see her use in the beginning of The Force Awakens, she built all on her own using her own parts from other vessels. This shows how strong her engineering background was, which is why she was able to do so many things in The Force Awakens. When she was really young, she found an old X-Wing pilot's helmet. She enjoyed making up stories of the pilot's adventures during the war, and proceeded to make a doll that she could reenact those stories with. This is where she got her love for flying from, which is why when she found a computer from an old Y-Wing, she took it to not only learn alien languages such as binary language for droids, but also practice with the flight simulator for many years. This is how she learned the basics to fly, from the flight simulator from the Y-Wing. One day she actually ran into two Wookiees and spent some significant time with them. She heard stories of the famous Chewbacca from the Rebellion and his smuggling partner Han Solo. This is why when they first meet, she knows Han as a smuggler rather than the Rebellion general. One day when she was about 13 years old, she felt a cold presence that was unnatural. She didn't know it yet, but this was at the same time Ben Solo was committing to the dark side of the Force. Their dyad was already forming all the way back then, but it fully formed during the interrogation scene on Starkiller Base. Flash forward 6 years and we are now at the events of The Force Awakens. I'm not going to cover everything that happened to her during these movies, only the things I feel external material can enhance the scene in the movie. Early on when she was flying, she knew the landscape well because she had lived there her whole life. She also knew the schematics of the Super Star Destroyer she entered because she had studied the schematics of that ship before, and when it comes to flying the Falcon herself, she had spent a significant amount of time in the Falcon doing repairs, especially in the cockpit. She just never flew the Falcon herself. Flash forward to the interrogation scene. This is confirmed to be when the dyad formed in full strength. With the dyad formed, the two unknowingly exchanged part of themselves. Kylo gained access to most of Rey's memories, including what happened to her parents, and Rey was able to get Kylo's strength with the Force. This is why she became so powerful after this scene. She subconsciously knew how to do things she didn't know how to do before, and the same could be said with Kylo. This is also why Rey was able to do the mind trick. When she fought Kylo a few minutes later, she struggled at first because she hadn't tapped into the Force yet, but once she did, she felt a huge surge of adrenaline which gave her the energy and strength to overpower Kylo. When she struck him down, she actually heard a voice that told her to finish him off. It's unclear who this voice was, but it was probably either Snoke or Palpatine. Now when it comes to the actual events of The Last Jedi in The Rise of Skywalker, there isn't really much here. I can confirm though that she did learn the Force healing from the Jedi texts, which we see in The Rise of Skywalker. The only other thing I wanted to talk about is Rey's third lesson that was a deleted scene in The Last Jedi. And I know there may be some confusion about whether or not a deleted scene is canon or not, but this scene is part of the novelization of The Last Jedi, so that means it is a part of the official Star Wars canon. So this takes place right after the second lesson. Luke tells Rey that there is going to be an attack on the locals by some pirates, and that if Rey wants to be a Jedi then she can't intervene, because if she does the locals will be attacked even worse the next time. Rey decides to ignore Luke and go save the villagers anyway. When she gets there, the villagers are not under attack, but they are instead throwing a party. Luke tells Rey he lied to her because she needs to realize the galaxy needs people like her, not the Jedi. This infuriates Rey. She goes on a rant about how she used to believe in the legend of Luke Skywalker, and now she realizes she was wrong. What this helps establish is another reason why Rey would go to Kylo for help later on, because she is not in a good place with Luke right now. It also just shows how she used to believe in the legend of Luke Skywalker, the myth, and how hard it is for her to accept the way Luke is now. I understand why this scene was deleted, but I really wish it wasn't. And that's really it when it comes to the external material. And that is my analysis of why Rey is not a Mary Sue. I know there's going to be a significant portion of people who watch this video that already came into this topic with the notion that Rey is a Mary Sue. I doubt I changed your mind, but if you could be respectful about it in the comments, I would really appreciate it. Just be nice to people. Also, I'm a human being. I've reread this script many times, I've rewatched this video many times, but I'm prone to mistakes. If there is a point that you felt I made that was inaccurate, let me know in the comments and maybe we can discuss. Rey is really one of my favorite characters in this franchise. I remember when I saw The Force Awakens for the first time, I just instantly connected with her. You know, that lonely person who dreams of hopes and adventures but is shackled by circumstances. But I would say the biggest reason I love Rey is because of her compassion. Every day I try my best to make other people around me feel happy, and I try to be the best friend that I could possibly be to them. It's not always easy, you know, people do things that make you upset or hurt you really bad, and sometimes they don't deserve forgiveness and they don't deserve your compassion. But seeing what Rey did throughout this trilogy and how she was almost always compassionate, even towards those who didn't deserve it like Kylo, it inspires me to be the best version of myself. As a great man once said, while it is always best to believe in oneself, a little help from others can be a true blessing. And this brings me into the fandom. When The Force Awakens came out and the fandom seemed to be united for the most part, it was great. It really was great. Love for Star Wars was everywhere, people were excited for the future of the fandom, and things were just really good. And once The Last Jedi came out, it really did bring the worst out of our fandom, from everyone. And it's not because a lot of people disliked the movie, it's because of the way we treated each other. We called people who hated the movie sexist and racist, and we called people who loved this movie social justice warriors. My hope for this fandom is that we stop labeling people based off of their opinions of these movies. To someone, Luke was a symbol of optimism and hope, and seeing him in his negative way in The Last Jedi just really deeply hurt people. And it wasn't about character inconsistencies or not. It was about not seeing this person be this positive force for people, and it really hurt. And the same goes the other way. To some people, seeing Luke Skywalker make mistakes, but coming back from those mistakes and saving the galaxy is really inspiring to them. Don't assume why people love or hate something. You don't even know your closest friends 100%, so how could you know the reasons why people have certain opinions over the internet? Of course, discord and debate can happen. I have these kinds of discussions all the time and I really love it. But instead of trying to win a debate or trying to make the other person feel bad because you may know more than them, try to genuinely just share your opinion and have a good discussion, and try to listen to them, because if you don't listen to them, why on earth would they listen to you? That's what I try to do, and I'm not perfect at it. I'm a human being, I'm flawed, but I do try my best to listen to other people. One last thing, if someone loves something about this franchise, you should champion that. I don't like The Phantom Menace at all. I think it's a terrible film. But when people come to me and tell me how much they love it, I'm so happy for them and I'm jealous. I wish I loved everything. I'm gonna be honest with myself when I don't, but if other people do love it, I'm gonna support that and be really happy for them. Why would I want to make someone love something less? I wouldn't. Why would I want to make people feel bad for loving something? I wouldn't. I know I kind of went on a tangent here, but this Mary Sue topic about Rey is a very sensitive one, and I know there are going to be people who dislike this video who haven't even watched 5 minutes of it. But I can take it. I can take it because if this video just means the world to one person, a kid who loves Rey but is so disappointed by the way she's been hated on by this fandom, and if this video just means a lot to that one person, then what else could I ask for as a content creator? And if I changed one person's mind, one person who hated this character, and after watching this video they're like, oh okay, Rey's actually kind of interesting. If I changed that person's mind, again, what else could I ask for as a content creator? Anyway, for those of you who decided to watch this really long video, even if you disliked it, thank you so much. You don't understand the amount of work and the amount of time I had to put into this video. I really did work my ass off, and you guys watching it really means a lot to me. So thank you. Thank you so much. I hope everyone enjoyed this video. I do have a lot of other pro-sequel trilogy content on this channel, so if that's something you're interested in, then go check out those videos as well. Don't forget to smash that like button and leave a comment on your thoughts of this video, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.